Tonight we will explore the ancient teaching of karma. Not karma as punishment, not karma as some distant cosmic justice waiting beyond the clouds, but karma as the simple, quiet truth that every action we take ripples outward into the world and returns to us in ways we cannot always foresee. The Buddha once said that we are the heirs of our actions, that our actions are the ground upon which we stand. Tonight, through a series of gentle stories set in the villages and towns of ancient India, we will explore what happens when people weave harm into the fabric of their daily lives. We will see how the thread of cause and effect moves through time, through families, through entire communities, and we will discover, perhaps, how understanding this ancient truth can bring us peace. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing to fix, no problem to solve, no one you need to become. You are simply here, resting, breathing, listening. Your body is supported. The day is behind you. Whatever happened today, whatever waits for tomorrow, none of it requires your attention now. If this path calls to you, if these stories bring you comfort and rest, I invite you to subscribe so that we may walk this path together again. Let us begin this journey together. Take a gentle breath now. Feel the air enter your body, cool and soft. Feel it leave, warm and slow. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw release. There is nowhere else to be. There is nothing else to do. Simply breathe and listen. Let us explore our first story. In a small town along the banks of a wide, slow-moving river, there lived a flute maker named Tarun. He was known throughout the region for the beauty of his instruments. His bamboo flutes produced tones so pure that people said they could make the birds stop singing just to listen. Tarun's hands knew bamboo the way a mother knows her child's face. He could feel the grain beneath his fingers and know exactly where to place each hole, exactly how to shape the mouthpiece, exactly how much to pare away so that the air would sing. His workshop sat at the edge of town, a modest room with an open window that looked out onto a garden of jasmine and marigold. The scent of flowers drifted in while he worked. Shavings of pale bamboo curled at his feet like sleeping creatures. Tools hung from pegs on the wall, each one worn smooth from years of use. This was his world, bamboo and breath and the quiet patience of making. Tarun was a good craftsman, but he was not always a peaceful man. There was a wound he carried, a small wound, perhaps, by the measure of the world. But it lived in him like a splinter beneath the skin. Years ago, a young man named Vikram, the son of a powerful merchant, had publicly mocked Tarun at a festival. Vikram had been drinking palm wine. He had pointed at Tarun's simple clothes and laughed. He had called him a reed blower, a man who makes toys for children. The crowd had laughed. Tarun had stood there, holding one of his finest flutes, feeling the heat rise in his face, feeling the shame settle into his bones like dye soaking into cloth. He never forgot it. He carried the memory of that laughter the way a donkey carries a heavy load. It bent him. It shaped him. Every time he heard Vikram's name, something tightened in his chest, a fist clenching around a stone. Years passed. Tarun continued his work. He made flutes for celebrations, for temples, for traveling musicians who came from distant towns. His reputation grew, but the splinter remained. Then one day, a messenger arrived at his workshop. The jasmine was blooming outside. The afternoon light fell golden across the workbench. The messenger carried an invitation and a small pouch of coins. Vikram, now a grown man and a merchant in his own right, was getting married. His family wanted the finest flute in the region for the wedding ceremony. They wanted a Tarun flute. Tarun held the pouch of coins in one hand. He felt its weight. He looked at the messenger and said he would accept the commission. The messenger left. Tarun sat alone in his workshop. The jasmine scent drifted in. The light shifted, and something dark and old stirred in his chest. He remembered the laughter. He remembered the word, reed blower. He remembered the heat in his face and the way the crowd had turned away from him, still chuckling as if he were nothing. Now Vikram wanted his craft, needed his craft for the most important day of his life. Tarun picked up a length of bamboo. It was a fine piece, straight and golden, with a good grain, the kind of bamboo that wanted to sing. He held it to the light and turned it slowly. He could feel the music inside it, waiting. But instead of listening to the bamboo, he listened to the old wound. He began to carve, but he carved with resentment. He spaced the finger holes unevenly, just enough to create subtle discord. He shaped the air channel with a slight distortion that would make certain notes crack and waver. To an untrained eye, the flute looked perfect. The bamboo was beautiful. The craftsmanship appeared flawless. But Tarun had woven something invisible into the instrument. He had embedded his bitterness into every cut, every shaving, every careful measurement that was not quite careful enough. He worked for 3 days. Each morning, the jasmine bloomed. Each afternoon, the golden light fell across his bench. Each evening, he held the flute up and tested it, and each time he heard the discord, the notes that wobbled, the tones that cracked at the edges, and each time he smiled. This was his revenge, quiet, hidden, beautiful on the outside and rotten within. On the day of the wedding, the town was alive with color and sound. Garlands of orange marigolds hung from every doorway. The scent of sandalwood incense rose from the courtyard where the ceremony would take place. Musicians gathered. Silk rustled. Children ran between the legs of adults, laughing and chasing one another. The flute was brought out for the ceremonial music. A skilled musician, hired from a neighboring village, lifted it to his lips. He drew a breath. He played. The first note was wrong. Not terribly wrong, not obviously wrong, but wrong in the way that a slightly crooked picture hangs on a wall. You feel it before you see it. The musician frowned. He adjusted his embouchure. He tried again. The second phrase wavered and cracked. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The musician, confused and embarrassed, tried a third time. The flute produced a sound like a bird with a broken wing trying to fly. The ceremony stuttered. The priest looked uncomfortable. Vikram's bride lowered her eyes. Vikram's face darkened with anger and shame. The musician set the flute down and played on a borrowed instrument, but the damage was done. The auspicious moment had been marred. The sacred music had failed. Vikram's father, the powerful merchant, was not a man who accepted failure. He was not a man who believed in accidents. He picked up the flute after the ceremony and turned it over in his hands. He brought it to another flute maker in the next town. That craftsman examined it carefully, holding each hole up to the light, blowing softly through the chamber. And then he looked up with troubled eyes. "This was done deliberately," he said. "The spacing is wrong in a way that only a master would know how to achieve. These imperfections are precise. Whoever made this flute knew exactly what he was doing." The merchant's jaw tightened. He sent men to Tarun's workshop. They found him there, sitting among his bamboo shavings in the golden afternoon light, with jasmine drifting through the window. They dragged him to the town square. The merchant stood before him, holding the cursed flute. "You made this for my son's wedding," the merchant said. "You made it to fail." Tarun said nothing. There was nothing to say. They flogged him publicly. The bamboo switches cut into his back while the town watched. The same town that had once admired his craft. The same people who had once said his flutes could stop the birds from singing. Now they watched him cry out in pain, and no one intervened. When it was over, Tarun lay in the dust of the square. His back was striped with welts. His hands, his precious hands, shook against the ground. The flute lay broken beside him, snapped in two by the merchant's boot. Word of this reached a monastery nearby, where the Buddha was teaching. A monk who had witnessed the flogging told the story. The Buddha listened quietly, his eyes soft and still. Then he said, "You wove revenge into beauty and reaped pain from your weaving." He paused. The flute maker's hands knew how to create music, but his heart chose to create suffering. And so suffering is what returned to him. Not because the universe punishes, but because actions carry their nature forward, the way a river carries whatever is poured into it downstream. This story shows us how intention shapes outcome. Tarun discovered that his skill, when directed by resentment, became a weapon that turned against him. The Buddha taught that karma is not about cosmic punishment. It is about the nature of actions. When we embed harm into our work, into our words, into our relationships, that harm does not simply disappear. It moves forward. It finds its way back. When we fill our craft with bitterness, we should not be surprised when bitterness is what we harvest. Let us pause here for a moment. Feel your breath. Notice how it moves without your effort. In and out, soft and steady, like a tide, like a gentle wind through bamboo. You do not need to control it. You do not need to direct it. Simply notice. Simply rest. Your body knows how to breathe. Trust it. Let us explore another story. Along the same wide river, but farther downstream, where the water moved slowly between banks of red clay and tall grasses, there lived a fisherman named Anil. He was a poor man, not desperately poor, not starving, but poor in the way that made every day a calculation. How many fish would the river give today? How many could he sell? How many mouths waited at home? The arithmetic of survival. Anil's fishing net was old. The threads were fraying. He had mended it so many times that more of the net was repair than original. Some days, when the current was strong, fish slipped through the weakened sections as if the net were not there at all. He would pull it up, dripping and heavy with river water but light with catch, and feel a familiar frustration settle over him like damp cloth. His neighbor, a man named Sanjay, had 2 nets. Fine nets, strong nets with tight weave and weighted edges that sank perfectly and held fast. Sanjay's family had more land than Anil's. They had a cow. They had a proper house with a tiled roof instead of thatch. Sanjay was not wealthy by any grand measure, but compared to Anil, he lived in abundance. Anil watched Sanjay fish sometimes. He watched how the good net billowed out across the water like a bird's wing, how it settled evenly, how it came up full and silver with the day's catch. And he watched how Sanjay's second net hung drying on a wooden frame beside his house, unused, waiting. 2 nets, when one man could only use one at a time. And here was Anil, struggling with his threadbare web, pulling up water and weeds and not enough fish to feed his children properly. The thought came to him slowly, the way a vine grows along a wall. At first it was just a whisper. He doesn't need 2 nets. Then it was a consideration. If I had that net, my children would eat. Then it was a plan. He would not even miss it. Anil told himself a story. He told himself that Sanjay was careless with his abundance. that a man with 2 nets while his neighbor had barely 1 was not truly a good man, that taking the unused net was not really stealing. It was balancing. It was correcting an unfairness that the world had created. This is what we do when we wish to act against our own conscience. We tell ourselves stories. We build elaborate shelters of reason around the small, hard truth of what we intend to do. And then we step inside those shelters and pretend we cannot see the truth anymore. One night, when the moon was thin and the village was sleeping, Anil crept to Sanjay's property. The river murmured softly in the darkness. Frogs sang from the reeds. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of wet earth. He moved carefully, placing each foot with deliberate silence. The second net hung from its frame, a dark shape against the darker sky. Anil lifted it down. It was heavier than he expected. The weave was tight and strong. The weights along the edges clinked softly as he gathered it against his chest. He stood there for a moment, holding it, feeling its quality, its potential. This net would catch fish. This net would feed his family. This net would change everything. He carried it home along the riverbank, staying in the shadows, his heart beating hard against his ribs. He hid it beneath the floor of his house, wrapped in an old cloth, like a secret buried in the earth. The next morning, Sanjay noticed the net was gone. He searched his property. He asked his wife. He looked along the riverbank. Eventually, he concluded that the river had risen in the night and carried it away, or that some animal had pulled it from the frame. He was disappointed, but not devastated. He still had his primary net. He stopped fishing the section of river nearest to where the frame had stood, believing perhaps the current was too strong there. Anil waited several days before using the stolen net. He wanted the connection to fade. He wanted Sanjay to stop thinking about it. When he finally brought it out, he felt a thrill of anticipation. He carried both nets to the river at dawn. The mist hung low over the water. The first light touched the surface and turned it to gold. He cast Sanjay's net first. It flew beautifully, spreading wide, sinking evenly, just as he had watched it do so many times from a distance. He felt a deep satisfaction. Then he cast his own net, the old one, a little farther downstream. The morning passed. He pulled in Sanjay's net and found a good catch. Silver fish flashing and turning, enough to sell at market, enough to feed his children well. He emptied it and cast again. He pulled his old net and found a smaller catch, but still acceptable. 2 nets meant twice the harvest. The arithmetic of survival had shifted in his favor. Days became weeks. Anil's catches improved. His children's cheeks filled out. He bought oil and spices at the market. He began to repair his house. The stolen net was doing exactly what he had imagined it would do. But he grew greedy, or perhaps careless. Perhaps they are the same thing. One morning, he cast both nets too close together. The river was running faster than usual. Rain had fallen in the hills upstream, and the current had a new urgency. The nets drifted toward each other beneath the surface. The weighted edges tangled. The threads wrapped around each other like fingers intertwining. When Anil tried to pull the first net in, it wouldn't come. He pulled harder. Both nets were caught on something beneath the water. A submerged log, perhaps, or rocks. He could feel the weight of them, the stubborn resistance of tangled thread and current and river bottom. He waded in. The water was cold around his ankles, then his knees, then his waist. The current pushed against him, pulled. The more the nets seemed to grip pulled, the more the nets seemed to grip each other. And him. The current was stronger than he had estimated. The rain-swollen river had a force that he had not respected. He lost his footing on the slick clay bottom. The water pulled at him. The tangled nets wrapped around his legs, his arms. He was caught in his own tools, both the honest one and the stolen one, bound together beneath the brown water. He called out, but it was early. The mist was still thick. No one was near. Anil drowned in that river, wrapped in 2 fishing nets. His own, frayed and mended. Sanjay's, strong and stolen. They found him hours later, downstream, the net still wound around his body like a shroud. A woman from the village, an old woman who washed clothes at the river's edge each morning, had seen Anil using 2 nets in the weeks before. She had noticed. She had wondered. Now, looking at his body laid out on the bank, the nets still tangled around him, she understood. The stolen net became his shroud, she said quietly. The village buried Anil. His children were taken in by relatives. Sanjay recognized his net among the tangled mess and understood what had happened. He did not speak ill of the dead. He simply took his net home, cleaned it, and hung it on the frame once more. This story shows us how stolen tools can become instruments of the thief's destruction. Anil discovered that taking what was not his did not simply add to his resources. It added complexity, entanglement, and ultimately a trap he could not escape. Buddhism teaches that when we take what is not freely given, we do not simply acquire an object. We acquire the consequences of the taking. The Buddha called this the second precept, to refrain from taking what is not given, not because theft is punished by some cosmic judge, but because the act of stealing weaves a tangle that eventually binds the one who steals. When we reach for what belongs to another, we may find that what we grasp holds us more tightly than we hold it. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a soft breath. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. Your hands, your arms, your legs, all of them heavy and warm and still. The river of today's worries and tomorrow's uncertainties can flow on without you. You do not need to wade into that current. You are safe on the bank. Simply breathe. Simply be here. This moment is enough. Let us explore another story. In a larger town, inland from the river, where the roads converged and markets bustled with the exchange of grain and cloth and pottery, there lived a man named Ishwar. He was the village record keeper. His title carried weight. His word, inscribed on palm leaf, determined who owned which field, which family held rights to which well, which boundary ran where. In a land where most people could not read, Ishwar's literacy was power. He sat in a small room at the edge of the town hall, surrounded by stacks of dried palm leaves, each one inscribed with careful marks, property records, tax records, boundary agreements, birth and death notations, the history of the town written in his hand. The room smelled of dried leaves and ink and the faint sweetness of the oil lamp that burned beside his desk, even during the day, for the room had only one small window. Ishwar was a careful man, precise. His letters were neat and even. His records were organized by family, by season, by type. Anyone looking at his work would see a model of order and diligence. But beneath the order, there was rot. It had started small, as these things always do. A wealthy landowner had come to him one afternoon, many years ago. The man had a dispute with his neighbor over a strip of land between their fields. The neighbor, a poor farmer who could not read, claimed the strip was his. The landowner claimed otherwise. The truth was that the neighbor was right. Ishwar knew this. He had the original records. The landowner placed a small pouch of coins on the desk. Ishwar looked at it. He looked at the records. He looked at the landowner's steady, expectant eyes. He picked up his stylus and made a small change. A single character altered. A boundary shifted on the leaf by just enough. When the dispute was brought to the village council, Ishwar presented the records. The council could not read either, but they trusted the record keeper. The land was awarded to the wealthy man. The farmer lost his strip and could do nothing about it. Ishwar told himself it was a small thing, a minor adjustment, one strip of land among many. But the pouch of coins was warm in his hand, and the wealthy landowner told others. Over the years, more pouches came, more small changes. A well that had belonged to one family for generations was suddenly recorded as belonging to another. A field that a widow's husband had cleared and planted was reassigned to a merchant who wanted to expand. A path that everyone had used became the private property of someone who could pay. The farmers and laborers and widows who lost their land could not challenge the records. They could not read. They stood before the council and said, "But this has always been ours." And the council looked at the palm leaves and said, "The records show otherwise." And that was the end of it. Ishwar grew comfortable. Not wealthy, not obviously so, but comfortable in a way that a record keeper should not have been. His house had a second room. His wife wore better cloth. His grandchildren ate well. Generations passed. Ishwar grew old. His hand was less steady, but his system was well established. The wealthier families knew that records could be adjusted. The poorer families knew that records could not be trusted, but had no power to change this. A quiet corruption had settled over the town like dust settling on a shelf. It was simply how things worked. Then Ishwar retired. He passed his position to a younger man and settled into the quiet life of an elder. He had a grandson named Pavan, a bright boy with gentle eyes. Ishwar loved this boy with the fierce, uncomplicated love that grandparents often have. He had set aside a good piece of land for Pavan, fertile land near the river with access to water and rich soil. He had made certain the records were clear and correct regarding this particular property. His grandson would be secure. But there was a neighbor, a man named Devendra. He was the son of one of the families that had benefited from Ishwar's alterations years before. He had grown up watching how property changed hands. He had learned, not from any formal teaching, but from observation, that records were tools, that palm leaves could say whatever the person holding the stylus wanted them to say. Devendra could read. This was new. A generation had passed, and more people in the town were learning their letters. Devendra looked at the records pertaining to his property and Pavan's property. He looked at the boundary lines, and then he visited the new record keeper, a younger man, a man who had also observed how things worked. Another pouch of coins changed hands. Another character was altered on a palm leaf, and Pavan's fertile land near the river became Devendra's land, according to the records. When Pavan brought the dispute to the council, he stood there, a young man with gentle eyes, and said, "But this land was my grandfather's. It has been in our family for years." The council looked at the palm leaves. "The records show otherwise," they said. Ishwar was still alive. He sat in the back of the council meeting, leaning on a walking stick, and listened. He heard the words spoken over his grandson, the same words that had been spoken over so many farmers and widows and laborers across the decades. The records show otherwise. He recognized it. Not just the words. He recognized the entire mechanism, the quiet corruption, the altered leaf, the helpless claimant standing before a system that valued ink over truth. He recognized it because he had built it. Stone by stone, alteration by alteration, pouch by pouch, he had constructed this system, and now it had turned its machinery upon his own blood. He went to the new record keeper. He demanded to see the records. He pointed to the alteration with his trembling, aged finger. "This has been changed," he said. "This is not the original." The record keeper looked at him with calm, untroubled eyes. "The records show what the records show," he said. "Isn't that what you always taught us?" Ishwar stood in that small room with its smell of dried leaves and ink and lamplight, and he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Not the physical ground, something deeper, something in the nature of cause and effect, in the long, slow turning of actions into consequences. Word of this reached the Buddha, who was teaching in a nearby grove. A monk told the story. The Buddha sat beneath a sal tree, its broad leaves casting dappled shadows on the ground. He listened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You taught the village that records are lies. Your grandson learned this lesson." He paused. "When a man corrupts the tools of truth, he does not simply harm those who trust those tools. He teaches everyone around him that truth itself is for sale. And once that lesson is learned, it cannot be unlearned. It passes from hand to hand, from generation to generation, until even the teacher's own family finds itself standing before a corrupted system with nothing but the truth on their side and no one willing to believe it." This story shows us how normalizing corruption creates a system that eventually consumes its creator. Ishwar discovered that his decades of small alterations had not simply enriched him. They had trained an entire community in dishonesty. Buddhism teaches the concept of dependent origination, called pratityasamutpada in Sanskrit. It means that everything arises in dependence on causes and conditions. Ishwar created the conditions for corruption, and those conditions continued to produce corruption long after he stopped participating. When we poison the systems we live within, we poison the water our own grandchildren will drink. Let us pause here and rest. Feel your breathing. Notice how the air moves in and out. You are not doing this. It is being done for you. Your body breathes itself. Your heart beats itself. You are held by processes so ancient and reliable that you never need to think about them. Rest in that. Let your body do what it knows how to do. Let your mind soften. There is nothing to figure out. There is nothing to solve. Simply be here, breathing, resting, listening. And now let us turn to another story. A story about water and dye and the terrible cost of convenience. In a town known for its textiles, where bolts of colored cloth hung from every shop front and the air smelled of mordant and wet fiber, there lived an indigo dyer named Priya. She was skilled in her craft. She knew the ancient methods of extracting blue from the indigo plant, of building the fermentation vat, of timing the dips so that the cloth emerged in shades ranging from the palest sky to the deepest midnight. Her workshop was a place of transformation. Bundles of white cotton entered one door. Lengths of brilliant blue emerged from the other. Between those two doors lay the vats, large clay vessels sunk into the ground, filled with the dark living liquid that turned fiber into something beautiful. The smell was strong, alkaline, and organic. The smell of fermentation, of chemistry, of change. But the vats produced waste. After the indigo had given its color, what remained was a toxic residue, dark liquid laced with chemicals that burned the skin and poisoned the soil. Proper disposal required carrying the waste far from the town to a designated pit lined with clay where it could dry and break down slowly over seasons. This was expensive. It required carts and laborers and time. It cut into profit. Priya looked at the cost of proper disposal. She looked at her profits. She looked at the stream that ran behind her workshop, a clear stream that flowed through the edge of town, past the washing stones where women scrubbed their laundry, past the shallow bend where children played in the warm afternoons, past the gardens where families grew vegetables. She made her calculation. At night, when the town was sleeping, she began to pour the waste into the stream, not all at once, a little at a time, enough to dilute, enough to hope the current would carry it away before anyone noticed. The dark liquid swirled into the clear water and disappeared downstream. At first, no one connected the changes to Priya's workshop. The stream took on a faint smell. Some of the children who played in the shallows developed rashes on their legs. A few gardens near the stream produced vegetables that tasted bitter. People noticed these things the way people notice small discomforts. They adjusted. They moved their washing a little upstream. They told the children to play somewhere else. They pulled the bitter vegetables and planted new ones. But Priya continued. Season after season, the waste flowed into the stream. The residue accumulated in the soil along the banks. It seeped into the water table. The small discomforts became larger ones. Children fell ill more frequently. Skin conditions spread. An elderly man who drank from the stream every morning developed a sickness in his stomach that would not heal. Priya knew. She saw the connection that others could not yet make. She saw the children with rashes. She heard about the illnesses. She knew what she was pouring into that stream. But she had built her life around the savings. She had expanded her workshop. She had taken on more orders. The cost of stopping, of going back to proper disposal, of admitting what she had done, seemed too great. And so she continued. This is how harm persists. Not because people are monsters, not because they lack all conscience, but because the cost of stopping feels greater than the cost of continuing. Because each day of continuation makes the next day's stopping harder. Because we build our lives on foundations we know are cracked, and we cannot bear to look down. Years passed. Priya prospered. Her indigo was the finest in the region. Merchants came from distant towns to buy her cloth. She had a large house now, with a tiled roof and a courtyard where her grandchildren played. Her grandchildren. There was one in particular, a small girl with bright eyes and a laugh that sounded like water over smooth stones. Priya loved this child with a love so deep it frightened her sometimes. She would watch the girl playing in the courtyard and feel a tenderness so vast it was almost pain. The girl liked to play near the stream. All the children did. Despite the warnings, despite the faint smell, the stream was where the children gathered on hot afternoons. The water was cool. The banks were shaded. The shallow bend was perfect for small feet and splashing hands. Priya had told her daughter to keep the girl away from the stream. But children are children. They find water the way water finds the lowest ground. It is their nature. The girl fell ill slowly, a fever that came and went, a tiredness that seemed too deep for a child so young, rashes that appeared and faded and appeared again. Priya watched from her large house with its tiled roof, and something cold began to move through her. A recognition. A terrible, slow dawning recognition. The healers could not help. They did not know what poison lived in the water. They treated the symptoms and shook their heads. The girl grew weaker. Priya sat beside the girl's sleeping mat each evening, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, watching the small chest rise and fall with labored breath. She whispered to the child. She sang old songs. She promised that everything would be well, but even as the words left her lips, She felt their hollowness. She knew what lived in that stream. She had put it there herself, season after season, pouring darkness into clear water while the town slept. One night, when the girl's fever was high and her breathing shallow, Priya stepped outside. The air was warm and still. Stars hung low in the sky like scattered grain on a dark threshing floor. She could hear the stream from where she stood, its quiet murmur, its steady, patient movement through the town, carrying whatever was poured into it downstream. Always downstream. She stood there for a long time, listening to the water, feeling something break inside her. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, the way a dam breaks. First a trickle, then a crack, then the whole structure giving way. The next morning, she went to the village elder. She told him everything. She told him about the waste, about the years of dumping, about the stream and the soil and the water table. She told him why the children were sick, why the gardens produced bitter fruit, why the old man's stomach would not heal. The elder listened with a face that moved from confusion to understanding, to something beyond anger, something quieter and heavier than anger, something like grief. Word spread through the town the way the dye had spread through the water, slowly at first, then everywhere, staining everything it touched. Families who had lost health, who had watched their children suffer, who had pulled bitter vegetables from their gardens and not understood why, now understood, and understanding brought rage. Priya lost everything, not all at once, but steadily, the way she had poisoned the stream, steadily and completely. Her workshop was shuttered by order of the council. Her supplies were confiscated. The merchants who had bought her cloth refused to deal with her. Neighbors who had smiled at her in the market turned their faces away. Her family name, once spoken with respect, became a word people used to mean betrayal. To do a priya, they said, meaning to smile at someone while poisoning them. She paid what she could to begin the long process of cleaning the stream. Workers dug out the contaminated soil along the banks. They diverted the water through new channels while the old stream bed was scrubbed and lined with fresh clay. It was expensive. It consumed everything she had saved. And still, it was not enough. The poison had traveled too far, seeped too deep. Some of the damage could not be undone. Her granddaughter survived, but she was never quite as strong as other children. She tired easily. She could not run as far or play as long. Something had been taken from her that no healer could restore. Priya spent the rest of her years tending the stream. Each morning, she walked its banks, removing debris, clearing the channels, planting grasses to hold the soil. She became a familiar figure, did not do this for forgiveness. She did not do this for forgiveness. She understood by then that some things cannot be forgiven. She did it because it was the only true thing she could think of to do. She had poured poison into the water. Now she would tend the water, not to balance a scale, not to earn redemption, but because tending was what the water needed, and she was the one who had damaged it, and there was a rightness in that connection that went beyond punishment or reward. A monk traveling through the town stopped to watch her one morning. She was kneeling by the stream, pulling dead leaves from a section where she had planted new reeds. Her hands were in the mud. Her hair was gray and loose. She worked slowly and carefully, the way she had once worked with indigo, with the focused attention of someone who understood the material she was handling. The monk asked her what she was doing. "I am learning," she said, "what I should have known from the beginning." "What is that?" "That the stream does not belong to me." that it flows through many lives before and after mine, that what I pour into it, I pour into all of them. The monk nodded. He sat down on the bank nearby and watched the water move. After a long while, he said, "The Buddha teaches that our actions are like stones dropped into still water. The ripples move outward in all directions. We cannot choose which shores they reach." Priya looked at the stream. "I did not drop a stone," she said quietly. "I poured poison. For years." The monk was silent for a moment. Then he said, "And now you plant reeds and clear leaves and tend what you damaged. This too sends ripples." She looked at him. "Does it undo what was done?" "No," the monk said gently. "Nothing undoes what was done, but it changes what happens next. This story shows us how the consequences of harm do not remain contained." Priya discovered that poison poured into shared water poisons everyone downstream, including those we love most dearly. Buddhism teaches that we are not separate from the world we act upon. The stream that Priya polluted was also the stream that flowed past her granddaughter's playing spot. When we harm the commons, the shared resources and spaces and systems that sustain a community, we harm ourselves and our own families because we are part of that community. We drink from the same water we pollute. When we recognize this interconnection deeply, not as an idea but as a lived truth, we begin to understand why ethical action is not a sacrifice. It is wisdom. Let us rest here. Take a slow breath. Feel the air fill your chest gently, like water filling a clean vessel. Let it go. Feel it leave. Soft and warm. Notice the places where your body touches the surface beneath you. The weight of your head. The heaviness of your legs. These points of contact are holding you. The earth is holding you. You do not need to hold yourself up. You do not need to carry anything right now. Let yourself be held. Let yourself be heavy. Let yourself rest. Let us explore another story. A story about words and the spaces they leave behind. In a village surrounded by rice paddies, where the fields shimmered green in the monsoon and gold before the harvest, there lived a woman named Kavita. She was the village gossip, though that word, gossip, makes it sound small. What Kavita did was not small. She had a talent for words, a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. She could take a small observation, a glance between two people, a purchase at the market, a late return home, and spin it into a story that spread through the village like fire through dry grass. She did not always invent things outright. In settings that catch light differently. In settings that catch light differently, depending on the angle. She would say things like, "I am not saying that Mira was at the river at midnight. I am simply asking why her sari was wet in the morning." She would say, "Far be it from me to suggest that Rajan is stealing from the grain store. But have you noticed how well his family eats?" She framed everything as questions, as innocent observations, as simply noticing what anyone could see. But the effect was devastating. Reputations dissolved. Friendships broke apart. A young couple who were perfectly happy began to mistrust each other because Kavita had planted a seed of doubt about the wife's friendship with a traveling musician. A respected elder lost the confidence of the village because Kavita had wondered aloud, again and again, whether his judgment could be trusted after he was seen talking to a moneylender. Kavita told herself she was doing nothing wrong. She was simply talking, simply observing. People could believe her or not. It was their choice. She was just the messenger. This is one of the most seductive lies we tell ourselves, that words are just words, that observations are just observations, that we bear no responsibility for the interpretations that bloom from the seeds we plant. But the farmer who scatters seeds is responsible for what grows. even if the wind carries some seeds to fields he did not intend to plant. Kavita had a daughter named Lata, a quiet girl, shy and serious, with dark eyes that watched more than they spoke. Lata was reaching the age of marriage, and Kavita had been making inquiries. There was a family in the next village, good people, and the carpenter's family made their own. And the carpenter's family made their own inquiries. They asked people in Kavita's village about the family, and what they heard was not about Lata, who was blameless and gentle. What they heard was about Kavita. Story after story. The families she had disrupted, the lies she had told, the reputations she had destroyed. The carpenter's mother was a careful woman. She said to her son, "The girl may be sweet, but the tree she grows from is poisoned. A woman who destroys others with her tongue will teach her daughter the same. Or worse, the village itself is so damaged by her mother's words that marrying into that family means marrying into a web of enmity and mistrust." The match was refused, politely but firmly. Kavita was stunned. She went to the carpenter's family and asked why. They were vague. They said only that the families were not well suited. But Kavita, who had spent her life reading between lines and finding hidden meanings, knew. She could see it in their averted eyes, in their careful politeness, in the way they closed the door just a little too quickly. She returned home and sat in her kitchen. The cooking fire had gone out. The room was dim and smelled of cold ash. Lata was in the garden, pulling weeds, unaware of what had happened. Kavita watched her through the doorway, her quiet, gentle daughter, her blameless child. And she understood that her own tongue had built a wall around her daughter's future. She went to a nun who lived at the edge of the village, an old woman named Sister Mala, who had renounced worldly life many years ago and now spent her days meditating and tending a small garden of medicinal herbs. Kavita had never visited her before. She had always considered the nun irrelevant. What use was a woman who sat still and grew plants when there was so much to talk about in the village? But now Kavita had nowhere else to go. She sat on the ground outside the nun's hut, which was barely more than a lean-to of woven palm fronds against a large rock. Sister Mala was sorting dried herbs on a flat stone. Her hands moved slowly and deliberately, separating leaf from stem, setting aside what was useful, discarding what was not. "My daughter has been refused a good match because of me," Kavita said, "because of what people say about me." Sister Mala continued sorting herbs. She did not look up. "What do they say about you? That I am a gossip, that I ruin people with my words. Is it true?" Kavita was quiet for a long time. The sorting continued. Small sounds, dry leaves against stone. "I only say what I observe," Kavita said at last. Sister Mala looked up. Her eyes were very clear, very steady. "Tell me," she said, "when you pull a thread from a cloth, do you observe the cloth or do you unravel it?" "I do not understand." Sister Mala held up a piece of cloth from her robe. It was old and patched. She pinched a single loose thread and pulled it gently. A small section of the weave puckered and distorted. "I did not tear the cloth," Sister Mala said. "I only pulled what was already loose. But look." She held up the distorted section. "The cloth is damaged just the same." Kavita stared at the puckered fabric. "Your words are like this," Sister Mala said. "You find the loose threads in people's lives, the small imperfections, the moments of weakness, and you pull them. You say you are only observing. But observation that is shared with the intention to damage is not observation. It is destruction, wearing the mask of innocence." Kavita felt something shift inside her. Not a dramatic revelation, more like a door opening onto a room she had always known was there but had kept carefully closed. "But what do I do now?" she asked. "The words are already spoken. The stories are already told. I cannot take them back." Sister Mala set down the cloth. She reached for a small cushion filled with feathers that she used for sitting during meditation. She opened one end of the cushion and held it up. Then she carried it to the edge of the garden where the afternoon wind was blowing steadily from the east. She shook the cushion out. The feathers caught the wind and scattered. Hundreds of tiny feathers, lifting and swirling and drifting in every direction. Over the garden, into the trees, across the rice paddies, into the sky. The two women stood watching the feathers disappear. "Now," Sister Mala said, "gather them back." Kavita stared at the empty fields, the trees, the wide sky where feathers still tumbled in the distance. "I cannot," she whispered. "No," Sister Mala said, "you cannot, and neither can you gather back the words you have scattered across this village. They have flown where you cannot follow. They have landed where you cannot reach. They live now in the minds and hearts of people you may never speak to again, shaping opinions, coloring judgments, building walls between people who might otherwise have loved each other." Kavita sank to the ground. The afternoon light was fading. The wind continued to blow, carrying the last visible feathers beyond the tree line. "What then?" Kavita said. "If I cannot undo what I have done, what is left?" Sister Mala sat down beside her. "What is left," she said, "is what you do next. You cannot gather the feathers, but you can stop scattering them. You cannot unsay the words, but you can learn to speak differently. You can learn to use your sharp mind and your sharp tongue for something other than cutting. How? By practicing what the Buddha called right speech. Before you speak, ask yourself 4 things. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it the right time? All 4? Kavita asked. All 4, every time. Kavita sat with this. The wind blew, the light dimmed. The empty cushion lay on the ground between them like a shed skin. She went home. She found Lada in the kitchen, preparing the evening meal. Rice was steaming. Lentils were simmering. The fire was warm. Lada looked up and smiled, and Kavita felt her heart crack open like a seed in wet earth. She did not tell Lada about the refused match that day. She needed time. She needed to learn how to speak about it without adding poison to the telling. She needed to practice what Sister Mala had taught her. She began the next morning. A neighbor stopped her at the well and began to share a rumor about a family across the village. Kavita felt the old pull, the familiar thrill of new information, of a story taking shape, of words sharpening themselves on her tongue. But she paused. Is it true? She did not know. Is it kind? It was not. Is it necessary? It was not. Is it the right time? It was never the right time for cruelty dressed as conversation. She said nothing. She drew her water and walked home. The silence felt strange in her mouth, uncomfortable, like holding a stone under her tongue. But she held it. Days passed, then weeks. Kavita practiced silence the way she had once practiced speech. She trained her tongue the way a musician trains unruly fingers. She caught herself 100 times a day, reaching for words that would cut, and each time she paused. Each time she asked the 4 questions, and each time the words fell away, unnecessary, unkind, untrue, or poorly timed. The village noticed, at first with suspicion, then with curiosity, then, slowly, with something like cautious relief. The air in the village changed. Conversations became simpler. People relaxed in ways they had not even known they were tense. The constant background noise of rumor and innuendo faded, and in its place, a quiet grew. Not an empty quiet, a living quiet, the kind of quiet that allows trust to take root. A year passed. Kavita found another match for Lotta, a family from a neighboring village who had heard of Kavita's change and were willing to look past her history. The young man was a farmer, good-hearted and steady. Lotta met him and smiled, and he smiled back, and that was enough. At the wedding, Sister Mala attended. She sat at the edge of the celebration, quiet and small, eating rice from a simple bowl. Kavita brought her a garland of jasmine. "Thank you," Kavita said. Sister Mala looked at her. "You did the work," she said. "I only showed you the feathers." This story shows us the irreversible nature of harmful speech. Kavita discovered that words, once spoken, cannot be retrieved. They scatter like feathers in the wind, landing in places we cannot see and shaping lives we cannot reach. The Buddha placed right speech among the essential practices of the Eightfold Path. He taught that speech should be true, kind, necessary, and timely. Not because harsh words are punished, but because words are actions. They carry weight, they create conditions. They build or destroy the fabric of community. When we speak carelessly, we scatter feathers we can never gather back. But when we learn to speak with care, we begin to weave something new, something that can hold trust. Let us pause here and rest. Notice your breathing. It has continued all this time without your direction, in and out, soft and rhythmic, like waves against a quiet shore. You do not need to manage it. You do not need to improve it. Your breath is already perfect. Your body already knows exactly what to do. Let your jaw soften. Let the small muscles around your eyes release. Let your tongue rest gently in your mouth. There is no effort needed. There is nowhere to be. Simply rest. Simply breathe. Simply be. Let us turn now to another story, a story about silence and the harm that hiding can do. In a village at the edge of a great forest, where the trees grew so tall and thick that the canopy blocked the sun, and the forest floor was a dim, cool world of fern and moss. There lived a woodcutter named Gopal. He was a strong man with broad shoulders and calloused hands. He knew the forest the way Tarun had known bamboo, the way Priya had known indigo. He knew which trees were ready for cutting and which needed years yet to grow. He knew where the streams ran, where the deer paths wound, where the old banyan trees spread their roots so wide that a man could walk among them as if walking through a temple. Gopal was respected. He was fair in his dealings. He charged honest prices for his timber. He replanted saplings when he felled mature trees. He was, by every visible measure, a good man. But Gopal had a secret. Years ago, when he was younger and less careful, he had been cutting a large tree on a steep hillside above the village. It was monsoon season. The ground was soft with rain. He had been warned not to cut on that hillside during the rains. The village elder had said the roots of the old trees held the soil in place, and without them, the hill could slide. But the tree was valuable, a tall teak with straight grain and no rot. A tree worth more than a month of ordinary cutting. Gopal looked at the tree and looked at the sky and told himself the rains were almost over. That one tree would not matter, that the hill had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more. He cut the tree. It fell with a great crash, tearing its roots from the softened earth, leaving a wound in the hillside like a mouth open in surprise. Gopal trimmed the branches, sectioned the trunk, and hauled the timber away. 3 days later, it rained again. Hard, the kind of rain that falls in sheets, that turns paths to rivers and rivers to floods. The hillside, weakened by the missing roots, loosened and slid. Not a catastrophic landslide, Not a wall of mud and rock, but a slow, heavy slump of earth that shifted the drainage patterns on the hill and diverted a significant amount of water toward a section of the village where it had not flowed before. The diverted water damaged 3 homes, not destroyed, damaged. Walls cracked, floors flooded, stored grain ruined. One family's cow, tied in a low-lying shed, drowned in the muddy water before anyone could reach it. The village examined the hillside. They saw the stump. They saw the torn earth. They knew a tree had been cut. But Gopal had covered his tracks carefully. He had scattered branches over the stump. He had smoothed the drag marks where he had hauled the timber. And when the village discussed what had happened, when they stood on the hillside and pointed at the raw earth and wondered who had been so foolish, Gopal stood among them and wondered too. He said nothing. He helped repair the damaged homes. He contributed timber from his own stores. He was generous and present and concerned. He was everything a good neighbor should be in a crisis. And beneath it all, the knowledge of what he had done sat in his chest like a stone at the bottom of a well, heavy and hidden and always there. Years passed. Gopal married, had children, built a larger house, continued his work in the forest with the care and respect for which he was known. He became an elder himself. People sought his advice on which trees to cut, where to plant, how to manage the forest so that it would sustain the village for generations. And the stone sat in his chest, unchanged, undiminished. He thought about confessing many times. In the early years, he came close. He would open his mouth to speak at a village gathering and feel the words rising like bile. But then he would think of the consequences, the shame, the loss of reputation, the anger of the families whose homes had been damaged. And he would swallow the words back down, and the stone would settle deeper. This is the nature of concealed harm. It does not fade with time. It calcifies. It becomes part of the structure of the self, the way a tree grows around a nail driven into its trunk. The bark covers the nail. The wood thickens around it. From the outside, the tree looks whole, but inside, the metal remains and the wood around it is distorted, twisted by the presence of something that does not belong. Gopal's secret distorted him in ways he could barely perceive. He became rigid in his opinions. He was the first to judge others for carelessness, the loudest voice calling for accountability when something went wrong in the village. He was, without realizing it, building a fortress of moral authority around the one place where his own morality had failed. The louder he demanded honesty from others, the deeper he buried his own dishonesty. The more he positioned himself as a man of integrity, the heavier the stone in his chest became. His wife noticed something, not the secret itself, but its shadow. She noticed that Gopal did not sleep well, that he sometimes stood at the window in the middle of the night, staring at the dark outline of the forested hills, that he was quick to anger about small things, a spilled cup, a child's noise, a question asked at the wrong moment. She asked him what was wrong. He said nothing. He said he was fine. He said she worried too much. But she was right to worry, because a man who carries a hidden weight for decades does not carry it cleanly. The weight leaks. It seeps into every interaction, every relationship, every quiet moment. It turns peace into vigilance and rest into restlessness. It makes a man defend what does not need defending and attack what does not threaten him. It makes him brittle where he should be soft and hard where he should yield. One evening, Gopal was sitting outside his house as the sun went down behind the forest. The sky was streaked with orange and gold. Birds were settling into the trees for the night, their calls softening into murmurs. His youngest grandchild, a boy of 5, came and sat beside him. "Grandfather," the boy said, "why do trees fall down?" Gopal looked at the child. The question was innocent, a child's curiosity. But something in Gopal's chest shifted. "Sometimes the wind pushes them," he said. "Sometimes they grow old and weak. Sometimes the ground cannot hold them anymore." The boy thought about this. What happens to the ground when a big tree falls? Gopal was quiet for a long time. The last light faded. The first stars appeared. The boy waited with the patient expectation of a child who believes his grandfather knows everything. "The ground remembers," Gopal said softly. "The ground remembers where every tree stood. And if the tree is taken too soon or from the wrong place, the ground grieves. It shifts. It changes. It becomes something different from what it was." The boy nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Then he ran off to chase a firefly, and Gopal sat alone in the darkness, feeling the stone in his chest pulse like a second heart. That night, Gopal did not sleep. He lay on his mat and listened to the sounds of the house. His wife breathing beside him, the creak of wood settling, a gecko clicking somewhere in the rafters, the distant murmur of the stream that ran through the village, the same stream whose course had been altered years ago by the hillside that had shifted because of the tree he had cut. Everything connected. Everything flowed from everything else. He had always known this about the forest. He had taught it to others. The roots hold the soil. The soil holds the water. The water feeds the roots. Take one element away, and the whole system adjusts. He had built his reputation on this understanding, and yet he had failed to apply it to himself. He had removed something from the truth of his own life, and everything around that absence had shifted and distorted, just as the hillside had shifted and the water had flowed where it should not have flowed. He rose before dawn. The air was cool and smelled of dew and wood smoke from a neighbor's early fire. He walked to the forest, not to cut, not to work, simply to walk among the trees in the gray light before the sun touched the canopy. He found the hillside. After all these years, he could still find it. The stump was long gone, rotted away and covered by new growth. Ferns and young saplings had colonized the scar. To an untrained eye, the hillside looked healed, but Gopal could see the difference. The drainage channels that had cut new paths through the soil, the slight depression where the earth had settled after the slide, the way the trees on either side of the old wound grew at angles that compensated for the changed ground. The forest had adapted, but it had not forgotten. He sat on a rock near the old stump site and watched the light change. The canopy above him was thick with leaves. Drops of dew fell from high branches, catching the first light like tiny stars descending. A bird he could not see began to sing. Then another, then a third. The forest waking up around him, indifferent to his pain, continuing its ancient business of growing and dying and growing again. He sat there for a long time. When he returned to the village, he went to find a monk who had been staying at a small shelter near the rice paddies. The monk was a quiet man, middle-aged, with a shaved head and a robe that had been mended many times. He was sitting on a low stone wall, eating a simple meal of rice and fruit that a village woman had offered him. Gopal sat down nearby. He did not speak immediately. The monk continued eating, unhurried, attentive to each mouthful. When he finished, he set the bowl aside and looked at Gopal with eyes that were calm and patient and entirely without expectation. "I have carried something for many years," Gopal said. "Something I did. Something I hid." The monk nodded slightly. He did not ask what it was. He simply waited. Gopal told him, all of it. The tree, the hillside, the rain, the damaged homes, the drowned cow, The scattered branches over the stump, the drag marks smoothed away, the years of silence, the stone in his chest. He told it plainly, without drama, without seeking sympathy. He told it the way a man describes a wound to a healer. Here is what happened. Here is where it hurts. The monk listened. When Gopal finished, the morning had advanced. The sun was above the tree line now, warm on their shoulders. The sounds of the village had risen around them. Voices, animals, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the laughter of children heading to the fields. The monk said, "How long have you carried this?" "Many years, more than 20. And in that time, has the weight grown lighter or heavier?" Gopal closed his eyes. "Heavier," he said. "Every year, heavier." The monk picked up a small stone from the wall where he sat. He held it in his open palm. "Look at this stone," he said. "It is small, light. A child could carry it without effort." He closed his fingers around it. "But hold it in your fist for a minute, and you begin to feel it. Hold it for an hour, and your hand aches. Hold it for a day, and your arm trembles. Hold it for 20 years, and it has shaped your entire body around the holding." Gopal looked at the monk's closed fist. The knuckles were white with pressure. "The stone has not changed," the monk said. It is the same small stone it always was. But the act of gripping it, of refusing to set it down, has transformed a small weight into a great burden." He opened his hand. The stone sat in his palm, unremarkable, ordinary. "What do I do?" Gopal asked. "What do you think you need to do?" Gopal was quiet. He looked at his own hands, the calluses, the scars, the hands that had cut the tree and smoothed the evidence and built a life of visible integrity over an invisible lie. "I need to tell them," he said, "the families, the village. I need to say what I did." The monk nodded. "Yes," he said, "but understand something. Confession is not a magic that erases the past. The homes were damaged, the cow drowned, the families suffered. Your words now will not undo those things. Then why confess? Because the stone in your chest is not the deed itself. It is the hiding. The deed happened once, 20 years ago. But the hiding happens every day. Every time you stand before the village as a man of integrity, you hide. Every time you judge another for carelessness, you hide. Every time you lie awake at night, you hide. The deed is old, but the hiding is new each morning. Confession does not erase the deed. It ends the hiding." Gopal sat with this. The sun was fully up now. The day was bright and warm. Somewhere nearby, a child was singing a nonsense song about a frog and a lotus flower. "Will they forgive me?" Gopal asked. "I do not know," the monk said. "Forgiveness is their choice, not yours. But your choice is whether to continue carrying the stone or to set it down. Those are different things. You do not confess in order to be forgiven. You confess in order to stop hiding. What others do with your truth is theirs to decide." Gopal called a village gathering that evening. The light was soft and amber. People assembled in the open area near the well, the same place where they discussed disputes and celebrated festivals and marked the turning of seasons. Children sat on the ground. Elders leaned on sticks. Families clustered together, curious and slightly uneasy. For Gopal had never called a gathering before. He stood before them. He looked at their faces. Some he had known since childhood. Some were the children and grandchildren of people he had known since childhood. He saw the families whose homes had been damaged all those years ago. They were older now. The children who had waded through muddy water in their flooded homes were adults with children of their own. The cow that had drowned was a story told around cooking fires. a misfortune from the old days, something the family had long since absorbed into the larger narrative of their lives. Gopal told them what he had done. He spoke simply. He did not make excuses. He did not explain the value of the teak tree or the pressure of his circumstances. He said, "I cut the tree on the hillside during the monsoon. I was warned not to. I did it anyway. The hill slid because of what I did. The water damaged your homes. Your cow died. And I hid what I had done. I hid it for more than 20 years. The silence that followed was deep and wide, like a well with no bottom, like the pause between one breath and the next. Then the reactions came, slowly, like water finding its level. The family whose cow had drowned looked at him with expressions that moved through surprise and anger and something that might have been relief. The family whose grain had been ruined said nothing at all, their faces closed and unreadable. A younger man, one who had been a child during the flooding, stood up and said, "We spent months repairing our home. My mother cried every night, and you stood there and helped and said nothing." Gopal nodded. "Yes," he said. "I did." The village did not forgive him that night. Some never fully forgave him. The family with the drowned cow asked him to leave the gathering, and he did. A coldness settled between him and several neighbors that lasted for months. His reputation, so carefully built and maintained over decades, cracked like a pot dropped on stone. Not shattered completely, but cracked. The cracks showed. People saw them. But something else happened too. Something quieter. Gopal slept that night. Deeply. For the first time in years, he slept without dreaming of the hillside, without waking to stand at the window, without the stone pressing against his ribs. He lay down on his mat, and the mat held him, and the darkness was simply darkness, and he slept. In the weeks that followed, he began to repair what he could. He brought timber to the families. He offered labor. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply appeared each morning and asked what needed doing. Some people turned him away. Some let him work. Slowly, the way a forest reclaims a cleared patch of ground, something began to grow in the space where the secret had been. Not trust, exactly. Not yet. But the possibility of trust, the conditions for it. The monk was preparing to leave the village. Gopal found him by the road, his few belongings gathered in a cloth bundle, his bowl tucked under one arm. "I told them," Gopal said. "I know," the monk said. "The whole village knows. They are angry. Some are. Yes. Was it the right thing to do?" The monk adjusted his bundle. "Tell me," he said. "How is the stone?" Gopal touched his chest. He pressed his hand flat against his ribs, over the place where the weight had lived for so many years. "It is gone," he said. "The ache is still there, like a bruise where something heavy sat for too long, but the stone itself is gone." The monk smiled, a small, quiet smile. "Then it was the right thing," he said. "Not because it fixed everything, not because everyone forgave you, but because you are no longer building your life around a lie. And a life built on truth, even a truth that is painful, is a life that can hold weight. A life built on a lie cannot hold anything at all. Eventually, it collapses. You chose to set the burden down before it collapsed you." He bowed slightly and walked away down the road, his bare feet raising small puffs of dust in the morning light. This story shows us the weight of concealed harm. Gopal discovered that hiding a wrong does not erase it. It transforms the wrong into a constant, living burden that shapes the hider's entire existence. Buddhism teaches that right action includes not only what we do, but what we are willing to acknowledge. The Buddha included right speech and right action in the Eightfold Path, and both require honesty, not just with others, but with ourselves. When we hide our harmful actions, we do not simply deceive others, we imprison ourselves. The stone that Gopal carried was not the deed, it was the concealment, and the concealment grew heavier each year because it required constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant pretense. When we find the courage to speak what is true, even when the truth is painful, we do not guarantee forgiveness, but we end the hiding, and ending the hiding is the beginning of freedom. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel your body. It has been listening, absorbing, resting this whole time. It has been doing its quiet work of breathing and beating and being. Notice your hands. Are they clenched? Let them open. Let the fingers soften and curl naturally, like leaves at rest. Notice your forehead. Is there tension there? Let it smooth. Let your eyebrows drop. Let the tiny muscles around your temples release. You are safe. You are held. The stories are carrying you the way a river carries a leaf. You do not need to swim. You do not need to steer. Simply float. Simply rest. Simply be here. Let us turn now to another story. A story about patience and impatience and the seeds we plant when we refuse to wait. In a village known for its orchards, where mango trees lined the roads and the air in summer was thick with the scent of ripening fruit, there lived a farmer named Devon. He was a man who understood trees. He had learned from his father, who had learned from his father, the slow art of cultivation. How to graft a cutting onto rootstock, how to read the soil, how to prune so that the tree's energy went into fruit rather than wasted growth. His mango trees produced fruit that was legendary in the region. Deep gold with flesh so sweet and tender that people said eating one was like tasting sunlight. But Devon was growing older. His back ached in the mornings. His hands, once sure and quick with the grafting knife, had stiffened. He worried about the future of his orchard. His son, Nikhil, was a capable young man but impatient. He wanted results. He wanted yields. He wanted the orchard to produce more, faster, in greater quantity. He talked about new methods he had heard of from traveling merchants, chemicals that could force early fruiting, dense planting that would fit more trees into the same space, shortcuts that promised abundance without the slow, patient work of traditional cultivation. Devon tried to teach his son the old ways. He took him into the orchard and showed him how to read a tree. "Look at the leaves," he said. "See how this one droops slightly on the lower branches? The roots are reaching a clay layer. We need to dig around the base and add compost so the roots can push through." Nikhil looked at the drooping leaves and then at the dozens of trees stretching in rows before them. "Father," he said, "if we treated every tree this individually, we would never finish. There are faster ways." "Faster is not always better," Devon said. Nikhil said nothing, but his jaw tightened in the way that young men's jaws tighten when they believe their elders are clinging to the past. Devon saw this. He recognized it. He had been young once. He had been impatient once. But he had also watched what happened to orchards that were pushed too hard, too fast. He had seen the trees that fruited early and heavily for a season or two, and then collapsed, exhausted, their branches brittle, their roots shallow, their wood riddled with disease that moved through weakened tissue like rumor through a village. He tried to tell Nikhil this, but Nikhil heard lectures where Devon intended lessons. He heard resistance where Devon intended caution. He heard an old man afraid of change where Devon was a wise man afraid of harm. This is the nature of the gap between generations. The elder sees patterns that the younger has not yet lived long enough to recognize. The younger sees possibilities that the elder may be too cautious to embrace. Both see truly, but they see different truths, and bridging the distance between those truths requires a patience that neither may possess. Devon fell ill the following winter. Not gravely ill, but enough to keep him from the orchard for several weeks. He lay on his mat, coughing, while his wife brought him broth and hot compresses. Through the window, he could hear the sounds of the orchard, birds in the branches, wind through the leaves, and, increasingly, the sounds of change, the thud of a mattock breaking ground, the voices of laborers Nikhil had hired, the crack of branches being cut. When Devon was well enough to walk to the orchard, he found it transformed. Nikhil had been busy. He had cleared the understory, the low-growing plants and grasses that Devon had always maintained between the trees. He said they competed for water. He had planted new saplings in the gaps between mature trees, so close that their branches would intertwine within a few years. He had applied a purchased compound to the soil, something a merchant had sold him, promising it would double the yield. Devon stood among his trees and felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the winter air. "What have you done?" he asked. Nikhil stood beside him, proud and eager. "I have modernized," he said. "Father, this orchard can produce 3 times what it does now. The compound will force early flowering. The new trees will fill in the gaps. By next season, we will be the largest supplier in the region." Devon looked at the bare soil between the trees. The understory was gone. The network of small plants and grasses and fungi that had lived in the topsoil for generations, that had held moisture and fed the trees' roots and protected the soil from the harsh sun, all of it stripped away. The soil looked clean and neat and bare, like a house swept too thoroughly, like a body with the skin removed. "The understory protects the roots," Devon said quietly. "It steals water and nutrients," Nikhil said. "Every farmer I have spoken to says the same. Every farmer you have spoken to does not grow mangoes like ours," Devon said. But his voice was weak, and his cough returned, and Nikhil helped him back to the house and brought him tea, and the conversation ended. Spring came. The compound Nikhil had applied did its work. The trees flowered early and abundantly. Blossoms covered every branch, thick as snow, and the bees came in clouds, and the scent was overwhelming. Nikhil walked among the trees and smiled. This was what progress looked like. This was what the future tasted like. But Devon watched from the house with troubled eyes. He saw the heavy flowering and did not celebrate. He knew what it meant. The trees were being pushed. They were putting everything into flowers and fruit, drawing from reserves they would need later, spending energy they could not replace. It was like a man running at full speed without rest, magnificent for a moment, destructive over time. The fruit came. It came in astonishing quantity. The branches bent under the weight of it. Mangoes hung in clusters so dense that some branches cracked and split. The harvest was enormous. Nikhil hired extra laborers to pick and sort and pack. Carts rolled out of the orchard loaded with golden fruit. The market stalls overflowed. Money came in faster than it ever had. Nikhil was triumphant. He brought the accounting to his father and laid it out proudly. 3 times the yield, twice the profit. And this was only the beginning. Devon looked at the numbers. He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Go to the oldest tree in the orchard, the one your grandfather planted. Look at it carefully and tell me what you see." Nikhil went. The oldest tree stood at the center of the orchard. It was massive, with a trunk as thick as a man's waist and branches that spread wide enough to shade a family gathering. Nikhil's grandfather had planted it as a young man, and it had been producing fruit for nearly 50 years. He looked at it. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then he looked more closely. The leaves on the upper branches were yellowing at the edges. Several limbs showed cracks where the heavy fruit had strained the wood. At the base of the trunk, where it met the soil, there was a darkening, a softness in the bark. He pressed his thumb against it and felt it give, spongy and wet where it should have been hard and dry. He went back to his father. "There is something wrong with the old tree," he said. Devin closed his eyes. "Tell me," he said, "produced the most fruit this year." Nikhil produced the most fruit this year. Nikhil went. He walked through the orchard with new eyes, and what he saw chilled him. Tree after tree showed the same signs: yellowing leaves, cracked branches, soft bark at the base. The trees that had given the most abundantly were the ones suffering most visibly. They had been pushed beyond their capacity. The compound had forced production, but it had not provided the deep nourishment the trees needed. The removed understory had exposed the roots to heat and drought. The dense planting had created competition for light and water that the existing trees were losing. The orchard was not thriving. It was spending its savings. It was burning through reserves accumulated over decades of patient, careful cultivation. The abundant harvest was not a sign of health. It was a sign of depletion. The trees were giving everything they had because the compound told them to, but they had nothing left to give to their own survival. Nikhil returned to his father. His face was pale. "I see it now," he said. Devin opened his eyes. He looked at his son without anger, without judgment, with the tired patience of a man who has watched a prediction come true and wishes deeply that it had not. "The trees cannot sustain this," Nikhil said. "No," Devin said. "They cannot. What do I do?" Devin was quiet for a long time. The afternoon light came through the window and lay across the floor in golden rectangles. Somewhere outside, a crow called. A dog barked. "You stop," Devin said. "You stop the compound. You replant the understory. You remove the new saplings that are crowding the old trees. You prune back hard, cutting away the excess growth so the trees can redirect their energy to roots and trunk and recovery. And then you wait. You wait for seasons, perhaps years. The yield will drop. The profits will fall. But the trees will heal, if you let them." Nikhil sat down on the floor beside his father's mat. He put his face in his hands. The numbers he had been so proud of scattered in his mind like leaves in a strong wind. "I was trying to make things better," he said. "I know," Devin said. He reached out and put his hand on his son's shoulder. His grip was weak but steady. The intention was good, but the method ignored what the trees needed. You listened to merchants who sell compounds. You did not listen to the trees themselves. You did not listen to the soil. You did not listen to the generations of knowledge that came before you. Impatience is not the same as ambition. Ambition says, "I want to grow." Impatience says, "I want to grow now, regardless of the cost." The difference matters. Nikhil began the restoration the following week. It was slow, painful work. He removed the new saplings carefully, trying not to disturb the roots of the old trees further. He replanted grasses and low shrubs in the bare soil. He pruned heavily, cutting away branches that were cracked or diseased, shaping the canopy so that light could reach the inner wood. The next season's harvest was a quarter of the previous year's. The season after that, slightly better. The trees were recovering, but slowly, on their own schedule, in their own time. Nikhil learned to read that schedule. He learned to watch the leaves for signs of stress. He learned to test the soil with his hands, crumbling it between his fingers to feel its moisture and texture. He learned, slowly and humbly, what his father had tried to teach him. Devon lived long enough to see the orchard begin to heal. He walked among the trees one morning in early summer, leaning on Nikhil's arm. The understory was green again. The soil was dark and moist. Center. Its bark was firmer. Its leaves center. Its bark was firmer. Its leaves were deeper green. It would bear fruit again, though not as much as before. Some capacity had been lost. Some damage could not be undone. Devon touched the trunk of the old tree. His hand, thin and spotted with age, rested against the rough bark. "Do you feel that?" he asked Nikhil. Nikhil placed his hand next to his father's. He felt the warmth of the bark in the sun, the faint vibration of a living thing. "What am I feeling?" he asked. "Patience," Devon said. "This tree has been patient for 50 years. It has survived drought and storm, and now this. It is still here because it grew slowly, because its roots went deep before its branches went wide, because it did not try to be everything at once." Nikhil stood there with his hand on the tree, feeling its warmth, feeling its patience, and something settled in him, not all at once, not like a door slamming shut, more like sediment drifting to the bottom of a still pond. The urgency that had driven him, the need to prove, to produce, to exceed, it did not vanish, but it found a place to rest. It found a deeper current to join. Devon died that autumn, when the mangoes had long been picked and the leaves were beginning to dry at their edges. He died in his bed, in his house at the edge of the orchard, with the smell of earth and bark drifting through the window. Nikhil was beside him. The old man's last words were not dramatic. He simply said, "Listen to the trees. They will tell you what they need." Then he closed his eyes, and his breathing slowed and slowed and stopped, the way a breeze dies down at the end of a long day. Nikhil tended that orchard for the rest of his life. He never used the compound again. He never cleared the understory. He planted new trees only when old ones died, and he gave each new sapling the space it needed to grow at its own pace. The yields were modest. The profits were steady, but never spectacular. Merchants sometimes came with new promises, new products, new methods that would double or triple the harvest. Nikhil listened politely. He offered them mangoes. And then he said, "No, thank you. My trees are growing." A traveling nun passed through the village one autumn. She stopped beneath the oldest tree in the orchard, the one Nikhil's grandfather had planted, and admired its broad canopy and heavy trunk. Nikhil was working nearby, pruning a younger tree with slow, careful cuts. "This is a remarkable tree," the nun said. Nikhil set down his knife and walked over. "It is," he said. "It nearly died a few years ago. I pushed it too hard." The nun looked at the trunk, at the scars where damaged bark had healed over, at the new growth reaching upward. "But it recovered," she said, slowly. "With time, with patience I did not have at first." The nun smiled. The Buddha once said that a seed does not become a tree by being pulled upward. It becomes a tree by being given soil and water and light, and then being left to do what seeds know how to do. Our work is to provide the conditions. The growing is not ours to force. Nikhil looked at the tree. "My father said something similar. He said the tree teaches patience. Your father was wise." He was. I was not. But the trees waited for me to learn. This story shows us the cost of impatience and the wisdom of natural rhythms. Nikhil discovered that forcing growth depletes the very resources that make growth possible. Buddhism teaches that right effort, one of the elements of the Eightfold Path, is not about maximum exertion. It is about appropriate exertion, the right amount, at the right time, in the right direction. A tree that is forced to fruit beyond its capacity does not become more productive. It becomes exhausted. It burns through reserves it cannot replace. When we push ourselves or others, or the systems we depend on beyond their natural rhythm, we may see short-term abundance, but we pay for it with long-term depletion. True growth requires patience. True patience requires trust. Trust that the conditions we have set in place will, in time, bear fruit. Let us rest here. Take a slow, easy breath. Feel your chest rise and fall. Feel the quiet rhythm of your body, this rhythm that has continued without your effort throughout all these stories. You are like the tree. You do not need to force anything. You do not need to push or pull or strain. The conditions for rest are here. The bed beneath you is the soil. The darkness around you is the night that every living thing needs. The breath in your body is the water. Simply rest. Simply let yourself be held by these conditions. The growing, the healing, the restoring, these happen on their own, in their own time, while you sleep. Let us explore one more story tonight. A story about generosity and its opposite, and the slow erosion that happens when we close our hands around what we have. In a prosperous trading town where 3 roads met, there lived a grain merchant named Harsha. He was wealthy, not modestly so, not in the quiet way that Ishwar the record keeper had been comfortable. Harsha was visibly, undeniably wealthy. His granary was the largest building in the town, a long stone structure with thick walls that kept the grain cool and dry. Inside, sacks of rice and wheat and millet and barley were stacked to the ceiling in rows so orderly they looked like the walls of a fortress. And that is what they were, in a sense. A fortress. Harsha's fortress against the one thing he feared most in the world: scarcity. He had not always been wealthy. As a young man, he had known hunger. His father had been a poor farmer on marginal land. There had been seasons when the rains failed and the family ate once a day, then once every other day, then whatever could be foraged from the edges of the forest. Harsha remembered the feeling of an empty stomach, not the mild discomfort of a missed meal, but the deep, gnawing emptiness that sits in the belly like a living thing, that wakes you in the night, that makes your hands shake and your thoughts narrow until all of existence reduces to a single question: when will I eat? That hunger had shaped him. It had driven him from the farm to the trading roads, where he learned to buy grain where it was cheap and sell it where it was dear. He was shrewd. He was tireless. He worked with the focused intensity of a man who has stared into the mouth of real deprivation and sworn never to return. Over the years, his trades grew larger. His profits accumulated. He built the granary, he filled it, and he kept filling it. His wife, Sumitra, was a kind woman, generous by nature. She came from a family that shared openly, that kept an extra pot of rice on the fire for whoever might pass by. When she married Harsha, she expected that his wealth would make generosity easy, that having more than enough would naturally lead to giving. She was wrong. Harsha gave nothing away. Nothing. Not a handful of grain. Not a cup of rice. When beggars came to the door, he turned them away. When the village held a festival and each family was asked to contribute, Harsha contributed the absolute minimum, measured out with careful precision, not a grain more than was required. When a neighboring farmer's crop failed, and the man came to Harsha with desperate eyes, asking for a loan of seed grain to plant the next season, Harsha calculated the interest so high that the farmer could barely afford to repay it. Sumitra challenged him. "We have more than we could eat in 10 lifetimes," she said. "Why do you hold so tightly?" Harsha looked at her. "You did not grow up hungry," he said. "You do not know what it is like to have nothing. I will never have nothing again." "But we do not have nothing," she said. "We have everything. And still you grip it as if the famine were tomorrow." "The famine is always tomorrow," Harsha said. "You just cannot see it yet." This was the lens through which Harsha viewed the world. Every clear sky was a drought waiting to happen. Every good harvest was followed in his imagination by 3 bad ones. Every smile from a neighbor was a request not yet spoken. He lived in permanent anticipation of loss, and this anticipation had turned his wealth from a blessing into a prison. The more he had, the more he feared losing. The more he feared losing, the more tightly he held. The more tightly he held, the less he could enjoy what he had. He sat in his large house, surrounded by abundance, and felt the same gnawing emptiness in his belly that he had felt as a hungry child. This is the paradox of hoarding. It does not fill the emptiness it seeks to address. It deepens it. The hunger was real once, long ago, but it had become a phantom, a ghost that haunted the halls of plenty, whispering that everything could be taken away, that safety was an illusion, that only the grip of the fist stood between him and the void. The town knew Harsha was stingy. It was spoken of openly, without much rancor, in the way that people speak of the weather or the price of salt. Harsha does not give. It was simply a fact of the landscape. People worked around it. They did not ask him for help. They did not invite him to share. They included him in the community because he was there, because he was powerful, because his grain fed the town. But they did not love him, and he felt this absence of love as further evidence that the world was hostile, that people wanted what he had, that his vigilance was justified. Sumitra bore this loneliness with quiet grace. She found ways to give in secret, a sack of rice left at a poor family's door before dawn, a bundle of cloth for a widow's children, purchased from her own small household allowance. She did not tell Harsha. She knew he would rage, not because he could not afford it, but because every grain that left his control felt to him like a stone removed from a wall. 1 stone, 2 stones, and then the wall collapses. This was how he thought. This was the architecture of his fear. One year, the monsoon was late. Weeks passed beyond the expected date, and the sky remained clear and blue and merciless. Farmers watched the horizon. They tested the soil, dry and crumbling between their fingers. They looked at their seedlings, wilting in the unwatered fields, and they began to worry. Harsha watched too, but he did not worry. He had grain. He had mountains of grain. While others faced the possibility of shortage, he faced the possibility of profit. Scarcity meant higher prices. Higher prices meant greater wealth. The late monsoon was, for Harsha, an opportunity. He began to hold back his grain from the market. Not all of it. Just enough to create the impression of shortage. Just enough to push the prices upward. He sold in smaller quantities, at higher rates, to the same families who had always bought from him. They paid because they had no choice. They paid with savings they had set aside for other things, for medicine, for tools, for their children's education. They paid with the slow, grinding resignation of people who know they are being exploited and cannot stop it. Sumitra watched this with growing horror. She saw the families at the market, counting coins with trembling fingers, choosing between rice and medicine, between food for today and seed for tomorrow. She saw their faces. She saw what Harsha's hoarding was costing them. Not just money, dignity, hope, the simple security of knowing that the grain would be there when they needed it. She went to Harsha one evening. He was in the granary, doing what he did every evening, walking the rows, checking the sacks, counting, always counting. "People are suffering," she said. "People always suffer," he said, not looking up from his counting. "They suffer because you hold back what they need. You have enough grain to feed this town for a year. You could sell at fair prices and still be the wealthiest man here, but you choose to squeeze them. Why? Because this is how wealth works," he said. "Supply and demand. I did not create the drought. I simply prepared for it. You prepared for it by hoarding, and now your preparation is others' starvation." He turned to look at her. His face was set and hard. "You want me to give it away? Is that it? Open the doors and let them take what they want? And then what? When the real famine comes, and it will come, what do we eat? What do our children eat?" Sumitra looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Harsha, the real famine is here. It is in this room. It was gone before he could name it. Then it was gone before he could name it. Then the walls went up again, the same walls he had been building since childhood, and he turned back to his counting. The drought worsened. The monsoon, when it finally came, was weak and brief. The harvest was poor. Prices rose further. Harsha's profits soared, and the town began to suffer in earnest. A child died, a little girl from a poor family at the edge of town. She had been malnourished for weeks. Her mother had been buying what grain she could afford at Harsha's inflated prices, but it was not enough. The child's body, weakened by insufficient food, could not fight the fever that came with the changing season. She died on a Tuesday morning, while the sun rose over the granary that held enough food to feed her family for a decade. The town did not blame Harsha directly. They knew there was grain behind new. They knew there was grain behind those stone walls. They knew it was being held back. They knew the prices were artificial. And the knowledge sat in them the way Gopal's secret had sat in him, heavy and hidden and corrosive. A monk arrived in the town. He came on foot, as monks do, carrying nothing but his bowl and his robes. He was an old man, thin and weathered, with eyes that had the quality of still water. He sat beneath a neem tree near the market square and waited for alms. No one had much to give, but people brought what they could: a handful of rice, a piece of fruit, a cup of thin lentil broth. The monk accepted each offering with the same gentle nod, the same quiet gratitude, whether it was a full bowl or a few grains at the bottom. Harsha passed the monk on his way to the granary. He glanced at the old man sitting beneath the tree, his bowl in his lap, his eyes closed. Harsha felt a flicker of contempt. Another beggar, another mouth wanting to be fed from someone else's labor. He walked on, but the monk opened his eyes as Harsha passed. He looked at the merchant, not with judgment, not with accusation, simply with attention. The kind of attention that sees clearly and holds what it sees without adding anything to it. Harsha felt that gaze on his back as he walked. It was not hostile, it was not angry, but it was steady. And steadiness, when you are running from something, feels like pursuit. That evening, the monk was still under the neem tree. Harsha passed again on his way home. This time, against his own will, against every instinct that told him to keep walking, he stopped. "You sit there all day," he said, "waiting for others to feed you. Does this not shame you?" The monk looked up. "Does it shame the tree to receive rain?" he asked. A tree gives shade in return, Harsha said. The monk smiled slightly. And what do you give in return for the wealth the earth provides you? The grain does not grow by your effort alone. The rain falls without your command. The soil gives its richness without asking for payment. You receive abundantly from the world, and then you close your fist. Harsha felt the heat rise in his face, the same heat, perhaps, that Taran the flute maker had felt at the festival long ago. The heat of being seen clearly when you wish to remain hidden. I earned what I have, he said. You earned some of it, the monk said. The rest was given. By the earth, by the rain, by the labor of the farmers who grew the grain, by the roads that carry it, by the animals that pull the carts, by the generations who built this town. You stand at the end of a long chain of giving and declare yourself the source. Harsha opened his mouth to argue, but the words did not come. They sat in his throat like dry grain, unswallowed, because somewhere beneath his anger, beneath his fear, beneath the walls and the counting and the 30 years of hoarding, something had heard the truth in what the monk said. He turned and walked home. He did not eat dinner that night. He sat in his room and stared at the wall while Sumitra cleared the dishes and put out the lamp in the kitchen. He sat in the dark and felt the gnawing in his belly. And for the first time, he asked himself a question he had been avoiding since childhood. Is it hunger, or is it something else? He had spent his life assuming that the emptiness inside him was hunger. Physical, material hunger. And so, he had filled it with grain. Sack upon sack, mountain upon mountain, enough to feed a village. And still, the emptiness remained. Still the gnawing, still the fear, still the midnight certainty that everything could be taken away. What if it was not hunger for grain, like pressing a bruise? But he sat with this question. It was uncomfortable, like sitting on a stone, like pressing a bruise, but he sat with it, because the monk's words had cracked something open, and through the crack, a thin light was coming in, and the light was showing him the shape of a room he had never allowed himself to enter. The next morning, he went back to the neem tree. The monk was there, sitting in the same place, his bowl empty, his eyes soft with morning light. Harsha sat down across from him. He did not speak immediately. The market was beginning to stir around them. Voices, footsteps, the clink of pots, the smell of cooking fires. I have been afraid, Harsha said. The monk nodded. I have been afraid my whole life, since I was a boy, since the hunger. I thought that if I had enough, the fear would stop, but it has not stopped. It has grown. The more I have, the more I fear losing. The monk was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Have you ever watched a man carry water in his cupped hands? Harsha frowned. Yes. What happens? It leaks. No matter how tightly he presses his fingers together, the water leaks through. Yes. And what does the man do? He grips tighter. And then, it leaks faster. The effort itself creates gaps between the fingers. The monk let this sit between them. The market continued its morning business. A woman walked past carrying a basket of vegetables on her head. A child chased a dog around the corner of a building, and both disappeared, laughing and barking. Your wealth is the water, the monk said. Your fear is the gripping. The tighter you hold, the more you lose. Not the grain itself, perhaps. The grain sits in your granary, but you lose the good it could do. You lose the trust of your neighbors. You lose the love of your wife. You lose the peace that comes from knowing that what you have is enough. You lose your own enjoyment of what you possess. You hold the water so tightly that none of it touches your lips. Harsha stared at his own hands. Large hands, strong hands, hands that had built a fortune, hands that had been clenched for 30 years. "What do I do?" he said. The words were raw, stripped of pride, the voice of a man who has finally admitted that the strategy that defined his life has failed. "Open your hands," the monk said, "and lose everything?" The monk shook his head gently. "No. Opening your hands does not mean letting everything fall. It means holding differently. Instead of gripping from fear, you hold from generosity. Instead of clutching against loss, you offer from abundance. The grain does not change. The amount does not change. But the relationship changes. And when the relationship changes, everything changes. How do I begin?" The monk thought for a moment. Then he said, "Begin with 1 sack. Today, take 1 sack of grain from your granary and give it to the family that needs it most in this town. Do not sell it. Do not loan it. Give it. And when you have given it, notice what happens, not to them, to you. Notice what happens in your chest, in your belly, in the place where the hunger lives." Harsha stood up. He walked to the granary. He opened the door. The familiar smell met him. Dry grain and stone and the faint mustiness of stored abundance. He walked the rows. He counted the sacks. There were hundreds, thousands, more than he could use in 10 lifetimes, as Sumitra had said. He picked up 1 sack. It was heavy, perhaps 30 pounds of rice. He carried it to the door. He stood there, in the threshold, between the cool stone interior and the bright morning outside, and felt something in his chest tighten. Every instinct told him to put it back. Every voice from his childhood said, "You will need this. The famine is coming. Do not let go." He stepped outside. He carried the sack through the town. People watched. They recognized him. They recognized the sack, stamped with his granary mark. They stared. He went to the house of the family whose child had died. The mother was sitting in the doorway. Her eyes were hollow. Her face was thin. Beside her sat 2 other children, listless and quiet in the way that hungry children become quiet. Harsha set the sack of rice on the ground before her. He did not speak. He did not know what to say. He just set it down and stood there. The woman looked at the rice. She looked at Harsha. Her expression did not change. She did not thank him. She did not weep. She simply looked at him with eyes that held a grief so vast it had no room for surprise or gratitude or anything at all. Harsha turned and walked away. And as he walked, he felt something. Not the dramatic relief he might have expected. Not a rush of virtue or warmth. Something simpler. Something so quiet he almost missed it. The gnawing in his belly. The phantom hunger that had lived in him for 30 years eased. Just slightly. Just enough to notice, of need. It was almost nothing. But it was not enough. 1 sack of rice for 1 family in a town full of need. It was almost nothing. But it was a beginning. It was the first opening of a hand that had been closed for a lifetime. He went back to the granary. He stood inside and looked at the rows of sacks. They were still there, all of them except 1. The wall had not collapsed. The famine had not come. The sky had not fallen. 1 sack was gone, and everything else remained. He picked up another sack. Over the following weeks, Harsha gave away grain. Not recklessly, not in a frenzy of guilt, deliberately, 1 sack at a time, 1 family at a time. He lowered his prices to fair levels. He offered seed grain to farmers at no interest. He told Sumitra what he was doing, and she wept. not from sadness, but from something that had been waiting in her for years and had finally found its way out. The town responded slowly. Suspicion was deep. People did not trust a sudden change in a man who had been miserly for decades. But the grain was real. The prices were real. The seed loans were real. And slowly, the way water softens stone, the reality of changed behavior began to soften the town's resistance. Harsha did not become a saint. He did not give everything away. He still counted his grain. He still locked the granary at night. The fear did not disappear. It was too old, too deep, too woven into the fabric of who he was. But it no longer controlled him. It sat in him like an old injury. A bad knee, a stiff shoulder, something that ached when the weather changed, but no longer prevented him from walking, and the gnawing in his belly, the phantom hunger. It continued to ease, not all at once, not completely. But with each sack of grain that left the granary and entered a hungry household, the emptiness inside him filled a little, not with grain, with something else, something he could not name at first, and later came to understand as connection. The simple, ancient, irreplaceable feeling of being part of a community, of giving and receiving, of hands opening and closing in the rhythm of shared life. The monk stayed in the town for several weeks. He sat beneath the neem tree each day, and people came to him, and he listened, and sometimes he spoke. One afternoon, Harsha brought him a bowl of rice from his own table. The monk accepted it with his usual gentle nod. He ate in silence. When he was finished, he said, "How is the hunger?" Harsha sat beside him. "Different," he said, "still there, but different." The monk nodded. The Buddha taught that there are two kinds of hunger. The hunger of the body, which food can satisfy, and the hunger of the heart, which only generosity can fill. You spent 30 years trying to fill the second hunger with the first food. It was never the right nourishment. Harsha looked at the granary across the square, its stone walls, its heavy door. "I built a fortress," he said. "I thought I was protecting myself, but I was sealing myself inside." "Yes," the monk said, "the walls you build against the world also wall you away from it, and a man walled away from the world, no matter how full his granary, will always be hungry." This story shows us how hoarding creates the very emptiness it seeks to prevent. Harsha discovered that accumulation without generosity is a form of starvation. Buddhism teaches that generosity, called dana, is the first of the perfections, the foundational practice upon which all other spiritual development rests. This is not because giving is morally superior to keeping. It is because giving is the natural movement of abundance. Water that flows remains fresh. Water that is dammed and held becomes stagnant. Wealth that circulates nourishes a community. Wealth that is hoarded nourishes nothing, not even the one who hoards it. When we open our hands, we do not lose what we hold. We allow it to become what it was always meant to be. Nourishment, not just for us, but for everyone the current of our generosity can reach. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel your body settling deeper into rest. Your breathing has slowed. Your muscles have softened. The stories are like warm water flowing around you, carrying away tension you did not even know you held. Notice the places where you still grip, perhaps in your shoulders, perhaps in your jaw, perhaps in the small muscles of your hands. Wherever you find tension, let it go. Open the fist, release the grip. There is nothing you need to hold on to right now. Not your thoughts, not your worries, not your plans. Let them all drift downstream, the way leaves drift on a slow river. You are safe, You are warm. You are held. Simply rest. We have traveled far together tonight, through many villages, along many roads, beside many rivers. We have met Tarun, the flute maker, who wove resentment into beauty and reaped pain from his weaving. We met Anil, the fisherman, who took what was not his and found himself tangled in the consequences. We met Ishwar, the record keeper, who corrupted the tools of truth and watched his own grandson stand helpless before the system he had built. We met Priya, the indigo dyer, who poisoned the water that flowed past her own granddaughter's playing spot. We met Kavita, who scattered words like feathers and could not gather them back. We met Gopal, the woodcutter, who carried a stone in his chest for 20 years and learned that confession does not erase the past, but ends the hiding. We met Nikhil, who pushed his trees beyond their natural rhythm and learned the cost of impatience. And we met Harsha, the grain merchant, who built a fortress of abundance and starved inside it. Each of these people made choices, small choices, most of them. A flute carved with resentment, a net lifted in the dark, a character altered on a palm leaf, waste poured into a stream at night, a rumor shaped and released, a truth swallowed and buried, a compound spread on soil, a hand closed around grain. Small choices, but none of them stayed small. This is the teaching of karma, not punishment, not cosmic justice, not a ledger kept by invisible hands. Karma is simply this: actions have consequences. Every choice we make sends ripples outward, and those ripples touch shores we cannot see. The Buddha taught that we are the heirs of our actions, the owners of our actions, born of our actions. Our actions are the womb from which we emerge and the ground on which we stand. This does not mean we are trapped. This does not mean that one mistake defines us forever. Priya tended the stream. Kavita learned right speech. Gopal set down his stone. Harsha opened his hands. In every case, the harm could not be undone. The flogged back could not be unstriped. The drowned man could not be undrowned. The corrupted records could not be unwritten. The poisoned water could not be unpoisoned. The scattered feathers could not be gathered. The shifted hillside could not be unshifted. The exhausted trees could not be instantly restored. The dead child could not be brought back. But the direction could change. The current could shift. New actions could be taken, and those new actions sent their own ripples outward, and those ripples touched their own distant shores. This is the deepest teaching of karma. It is not about the past. It is about the present. It is about this moment right now, the choices available to us in this breath, in this heartbeat, in this quiet space between sleeping and waking. What we have done is done. What we will do begins now. Let us explore one more story, a story that gathers together the threads we have been following all evening. A story about a woman who understood karma not as a concept, but as a living truth woven into the fabric of every ordinary day. In a village that sat at the meeting point of two rivers, where the waters joined and became one, there lived a woman named Mira. She was a basket weaver, not a grand craft, not the kind of work that earns fame or fortune. She wove baskets from river reeds and strips of bamboo, sitting in the shade of a tamarind tree outside her small house, her fingers moving steadily through the pale fibers the way a spider moves through silk. Her baskets were simple, round and sturdy, with tight weaves that held grain and fruit without spilling. She made carrying baskets with double handles. She made storage baskets with fitted lids. She made small, delicate baskets for holding flowers at the temple. Each one was honest work. No basket was more than it claimed to be. No basket was less. Mira was not wealthy. She was not poor. She existed in the middle space, that quiet territory where most human lives are lived. She had enough. She had a house that kept the rain out. She had food each day. She had her craft and her tamarind tree, and the sound of the two rivers meeting just beyond the edge of the village. What made Mira unusual was not her baskets. It was her attention. She paid attention to everything, not in the anxious, vigilant way that Harsha had watched his grain, not in the sharp, predatory way that Kavita had watched the village for loose threads to pull. Mira paid attention the way the river paid attention to its banks, flowing along them, feeling their shape, responding to what was there. She noticed when a neighbor's fence was leaning and mentioned it before it fell. She noticed when the fruit seller at the market looked tired and asked if she was sleeping well. She noticed when a child walked to school with a limp and told the child's mother, who had not seen it because the child hid the pain at home. She noticed the way the light changed before a storm. She noticed the way the reeds grew differently in the dry months, tighter and more brittle, requiring a different approach to weaving. This noticing was not effortful. It was not a practice she had to remind herself to perform. It was simply how she met the world, with open eyes, with open hands, with the quiet, steady presence of someone who had learned, through years of sitting and weaving, that the world reveals itself to those who are willing to look. People in the village came to Mira, not for advice exactly, not for wisdom, in the way they might go to a monk or a nun. They came because sitting with Mira while she wove was like sitting beside a still pond. The stillness was contagious, the rhythmic movement of her hands, the soft sound of reed against reed, the shade of the tamarind tree. These created a space in which people could hear themselves think. And often, simply hearing themselves think was enough. The answers they sought were already there, inside them, waiting for the quiet in which to be heard. A young man came to her one afternoon. His name was Ravi. He was a potter, and he was troubled. He sat on the ground beside her and watched her weave for a long time without speaking. The reeds whispered as they passed through her fingers. A bird sang in the tamarind tree above them. The sound of the two rivers was a constant murmur in the background, the way the sound of breathing is always present but seldom noticed. "I have done something I am not proud of," Ravi said at last. Mira's hands did not stop. She did not look up. "Tell me," she said. Ravi was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. A customer had come to his workshop and ordered a set of water pots, good pots, large ones for storing water during the dry season. Ravi had agreed on a price and a date. But then another customer had come, a wealthier customer, offering more money for a larger order of decorative pots. Pots that would be displayed in a rich man's courtyard. Pots that would carry Ravi's name and reputation to a higher circle. Ravi had taken the second order. He had told the first customer that he needed more time. He had pushed back the delivery date, then pushed it back again, then finally told the first customer that he could not complete the order at all. He had not been honest about why. He had blamed a shortage of clay, a problem with his kiln, anything but the truth, which was that he had chosen the more profitable and prestigious order over the simpler one. The first customer was a widow. She needed the water pots before the dry season. She had counted on Ravi because he was the only potter within a day's walk. Now, with the dry season approaching, she had no pots and no time to find another potter. Ravi finished telling this. His hands were clasped between his knees. His head was down. Mira wove in silence for a while. Then she said, "Why did you come to me?" "Because I feel terrible," Ravi said, "and I do not know what to do about it." "Do you feel terrible because of what the widow will suffer? Or because of how you feel about yourself?" Ravi looked up. The question surprised him. He sat with it. "Both," he said finally, "but if I am honest, mostly the second. I do not like the person who made that choice." Mira nodded. "That is a useful distinction," she said. "Both feelings are valid, but they lead to different actions. If you feel terrible because of the widow's suffering, the action is clear. You help the widow. You find a way to make her pots, or you find another potter who can. You address the harm. If you feel terrible because you do not like the person you have become, the action is different. You examine why you made that choice. You look at what drove you. You decide what kind of potter you want to be." She paused. Her fingers continued their steady work. The basket was taking shape in her lap, round and firm and balanced. "But here is what I want you to see," she continued. "These are not separate things. When you address the harm, you also change who you are becoming. And when you examine who you are becoming, you naturally move toward addressing the harm. The two streams flow into one river. You do not need to choose between them." Ravi thought about this. "But the decorative pots," he said, "I have already committed. I cannot abandon that order now." Mira looked at him. "Can you not work longer hours? Can you not wake earlier? Can you not make the widow's pots in the time between sunset and sleep?" Ravi frowned. "That would be very hard. I would be exhausted. The decorative pots require my best work, and if I am tired, the quality will suffer." Mira set down her weaving. She looked at him directly. Her eyes were dark and steady and completely without judgment. "Ravi," she said, "you chose comfort and prestige over a widow's basic need. The cost of correcting that choice is effort and tiredness. The cost of not correcting it is a woman without water in the dry season, and a potter who must live with the knowledge that he chose his own advancement over another's survival. Which cost are you willing to pay?" Ravi sat with this. The birds sang in the tamarind tree. The rivers murmured. The afternoon light was warm and golden, the same golden light that had fallen across Tarun's workbench and Gopal's hillside and Harsha's granary, and so many other places where choices had been made and consequences had rippled outward. He stood up. He thanked Mira. She nodded and returned to her weaving. Ravi went home. He went to the widow and told her the truth. Not the excuse about clay and kilns. The truth. He told her he had taken a more profitable order and pushed hers aside. The widow looked at him with the resigned disappointment of someone who is accustomed to being deprioritized. She did not rage. She simply sighed. "I will make your pots," Ravi said. "I will work extra hours. They will be ready before the dry season begins." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Ravi made the pots. He woke before dawn and worked by lamplight. He shaped the widow's water pots with the care and attention he would have given to the decorative ones. He fired them slowly, properly, checking the temperature of the kiln through the night. When they were finished, he carried them to the widow's house himself. She tested them. She filled each one with water from the well and watched for leaks. There were none. The pots were solid and well made and would hold water through the driest months. She thanked him. Quietly, without effusion, the way you thank someone who has done what they should have done in the first place. Ravi returned to his workshop and completed the decorative pots. They were beautiful. The wealthy customer was pleased. Ravi's reputation grew. But when he looked at the decorated pots in the rich man's courtyard, displayed on pedestals where everyone could admire them, he did not feel the satisfaction he had expected. And when he thought of the plain water pots in the widow's house, full of clean water, doing their quiet work of sustaining a life, he felt something else entirely, something quieter and deeper, something that did not need an audience. He went back to Mira a few weeks later. She was under the tamarind tree, as always, weaving. The basket in her lap was nearly complete, the rim curving inward to form the mouth. "I made the pots," he said. "Both orders." She nodded. "How do you feel?" "Tired," he said. "And something else." He searched for the word. "Aligned," he said. "I feel aligned." Mira smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, like the first light before sunrise. "That is what happens when your actions and your values point in the same direction," she said. "It is not always comfortable. It is not always easy. But it has a rightness to it, like a basket that holds its shape because every reed is where it should be." Ravi sat down. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you know these things? You are a basket weaver. You are not a nun or a teacher. How do you know about choices and consequences and alignment?" Mira laughed softly. She held up the basket she was working on and turned it in her hands. "Look at this," she said. "Every reed in this basket depends on every other reed. If I weave one carelessly, it weakens the ones around it. If I skip a section, the basket will not hold its shape. If I use a brittle reed where a flexible one is needed, the whole structure fails when weight is placed in it." She set it down. "This is all I know," she said. "What I know about baskets, I know about life. Every action is a reed. Every choice is a weaving. We are always making something, Ravi. Every day, with every decision, we are weaving the basket of our lives. And the question is not whether the basket will be perfect. No basket is perfect. The question is whether it will hold what needs to be held." She picked up a new reed and began to work it into the weave. "Karma," she said, "is not a punishment. It is not a reward. It is simply the truth that the basket holds or breaks depending on how it was woven. If you weave carefully, with attention and honesty and care, the basket holds. If you weave carelessly, with resentment or greed or deception, the basket breaks. Not because someone breaks it, because it was made to break." Ravi watched her hands, the steady rhythm, the careful placement, the attention that was not effortful but simply present. "And if the basket has already been woven badly?" he asked. "If it already has weak spots, then you mend it," Mira said. "The way I mend my baskets. You find the weak reed. You remove it carefully. You weave in a stronger one. It takes time. The mended spot may always show. The basket may never be as strong as one woven well from the beginning, but it can still hold. It can still serve. It can still carry what needs to be carried." She looked up at him. "You are mending, Ravi. That is what you did when you made the widow's pots. You found a weak reed in your weaving, and you replaced it with something stronger. The basket of your life is not ruined by one careless choice, but it must be mended. And the mending requires the same attention and honesty that the original weaving should have had." They sat together in the shade. The tamarind leaves rustled above them. The two rivers sang their joined song. The basket grew in Mira's hands, round and sturdy and true. Let us pause here and rest for a moment. Feel your breathing. It has been with you all this time, faithful and steady, asking nothing of you. Let your awareness settle into the rhythm of it. in and out, rise and fall, like the rhythm of Mira's hands weaving, like the rhythm of water meeting the bank and drawing back. There is a steadiness in you that does not waver, even when your thoughts are turbulent, even when your day has been difficult, even when you cannot see the path ahead. Your breath is that steadiness. It has been with you since the first moment of your life. It will be with you until the last. Rest in it now. Let it carry you. There is one more teaching that Mira shared with Ravi that afternoon. A teaching about the nature of cause and effect that draws together everything we have explored tonight. Ravi had asked her, if every action has consequences, and we cannot always see those consequences, how do we know what to do? How do we choose when the ripples of our choices reach shores we cannot see? Mira set down her weaving. She looked at the two rivers that joined at the edge of the village. Come with me, she said. They walked together to the place where the rivers met. It was a remarkable spot. One river came from the mountains to the north, carrying cool, clear water over stones. The other came from the plains to the east, carrying warmer, slower water tinged brown with silt. At the meeting point, the two waters swirled and mingled and became one. For a short distance downstream, you could still see the two currents side by side, clear and brown, maintaining their separate identities even within the joined flow. But farther downstream, the distinction disappeared. The two rivers became one river, and no one could say which drop of water had come from which source. Mira pointed to the meeting point. Watch the water, she said. Ravi watched. He saw the swirling, the mingling, the brief separation, and then the joining. When you drop a leaf into one river, Mira said, you cannot control where it goes after the rivers join. You cannot say, this leaf will stay on the left bank, or this leaf will reach the sea by Tuesday. The currents are too complex, the interactions too many, the variables beyond counting, so we cannot know the consequences of our actions, Ravi said. Not fully, Mira said. No, we cannot trace every ripple to every shore. We cannot predict every outcome of every choice. This is true, and it is what makes some people say that karma is meaningless, that since we cannot see the consequences, we need not consider them. She knelt by the water and dipped her hand in. The cool northern current flowed over her fingers. But watch, she said. When I place my hand here, in the cool current, the water that flows past my fingers is cool. When I move my hand here, she shifted to the warmer current. The water that flows past is warm. I cannot control where the water goes downstream, but I can choose which current I place my hand in. She looked up at Ravi. This is the teaching, she said. You cannot control the consequences of your actions. They are too far downstream, too complex, too interwoven with the actions of every other being in the world. But you can choose the current you place yourself in. You can choose whether your actions flow from kindness or cruelty, from honesty or deception, from generosity or greed, from patience or impatience, from care or carelessness. She dried her hand on her sari and stood. The Buddha did not teach us to control outcomes, she said. He taught us to purify intentions, to choose our current wisely, because the nature of the current shapes the nature of everything it touches downstream. Cool water cools, warm water warms. Kind actions create conditions for kindness. Harmful actions create conditions for harm. We may not see the final result, but we can trust the nature of what we set in motion. Ravi looked at the joined river flowing away from them, toward distant places he would never visit, carrying water that would nourish fields and fill wells and eventually reach the sea. So karma is about intention, he said. Karma is about everything, Mira said. Intention, action, and consequence. But since we can only control the first two, that is where we place our attention. We set our intention with care. We act in alignment with that intention. And then we release the outcome to the river. We trust the current. We trust the nature of what we have set in motion. And we accept that the downstream consequences are beyond our control, but not beyond our influence. They stood there by the joined rivers as the afternoon light softened toward evening. The water moved past them, unhurried and constant. Birds flew low over the surface, their wings nearly touching their reflections. The air smelled of water and warm earth, and the faint sweetness of the tamarind tree behind them. This is what the Buddha meant, Mira said quietly, when he said that we are the heirs of our actions. He did not mean that every consequence returns to us precisely measured and exactly deserved. He meant that we live in the world our actions create. The flute maker lives in a world shaped by resentment. The fisherman lives in a world shaped by theft. The record keeper lives in a world shaped by corruption. The dyer lives in a world shaped by the poison she poured. And the person who acts with care and honesty and generosity lives in a world shaped by those qualities. She paused. The water flowed on. We do not choose our world from a distance, she said. We weave it, strand by strand, choice by choice, day by day. And then we live inside what we have woven. This is karma, not punishment, not reward. Simply the truth that we inhabit the baskets of our own making. Ravi was quiet for a long time. The evening was coming. The first stars were appearing above the trees. The rivers gleamed in the last light, two currents becoming one, flowing together into the gathering dark. "Thank you," he said. Mira nodded. "Go home?" she said. "Rest. Tomorrow there will be clay to shape and pots to make. Begin again. Weave carefully." He walked home along the river path. Behind him, Mira turned back toward her tamarind tree. Her basket was waiting, half finished, the reeds arranged and ready for the morning's work. She would complete it tomorrow. She would begin another. This was her life, simple and steady and woven with care. This story shows us the heart of the Buddha's teaching on karma. Mira understood what many of the other characters in tonight's stories had to learn through suffering, that every action is a strand in the weaving of our lives. We cannot control the final shape of the basket. We cannot predict every consequence of every choice. But we can choose the quality of the strands we weave with. We can choose whether our actions flow from kindness or cruelty, from honesty or deception, from generosity or greed. The Buddha taught that right intention is the beginning of the path, not because intention is all that matters, but because intention determines the current our actions flow in, and the current shapes everything downstream. When we understand this deeply, karma ceases to be something we fear and becomes something we participate in consciously. We become weavers who know that every strand matters. Every choice, however small, is part of the pattern. And the pattern we create is the world we inhabit. Let us rest here. We have traveled together through many villages tonight. We have sat in workshops and walked along rivers and stood beneath trees heavy with fruit. We have watched the thread of cause and effect weave through the lives of ordinary people, flute makers and fishermen, record keepers and dyers, gossips and woodcutters, farmers and merchants, potters and basket weavers, each one carrying the simple, profound truth that the Buddha offered to all who would listen. We are the heirs of our actions. We are the weavers of our own baskets. We live inside what we create. Tonight, as you rest, as your body settles deeper into stillness and your mind softens towards sleep, I want you to hold this teaching gently, not as a burden, not as a warning, but as an invitation to notice tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, the quality of the strands you are weaving, the small choices, the quiet moments, the words you speak and the words you hold back, the hands you open and the hands you close. None of us weave perfectly. Every basket has a rough spot, a place where the reed slipped or the pattern wavered. This is not failure. This is being human. The teaching of karma is not a demand for perfection. It is an encouragement toward attention, toward care, toward the simple, daily practice of choosing the current we place ourselves in. Cool water cools. Warm water warms. Kind actions create the conditions for kindness. This is enough to know. This is enough to begin. Now let your body settle. Let the stories dissolve like mist over a river at dawn. You do not need to remember every detail. You do not need to hold every teaching. The stories have done their work. They have moved through you the way water moves through soil, finding the places where nourishment is needed, settling into the roots of understanding that grow in their own time, in their own way, without your effort. Feel your breath. It has been with you all this time, steady and faithful, in and out, rise and fall. Let it slow now. Let the space between each breath grow a little longer, a little softer, a little more still. Feel your feet. They have carried you through this day, through all the tasks and steps and standing. They are done now. They can rest. Let them grow heavy. Let the muscles soften. Let the bones settle into the surface beneath you. Your feet are resting. Your feet are still. Feel your legs, the long muscles that have held you upright, that have climbed and walked and bent and carried. They are done now. They have nothing left to do. Let them release. Let the weight of them sink downward, pulled gently by gravity into the bed, into the earth, into rest. Your legs are heavy. Your legs are warm. Your legs are still. Feel your hips and your lower back, the places where tension gathers like sediment at the bottom of a river. Let that sediment settle. Let the current slow. Let the muscles of your back soften and spread, releasing their grip on the bones they have been supporting all day. There is nothing to hold up now. There is nothing to carry. Your back is supported. Your hips are cradled. Let everything soften. Let everything settle. Feel your belly, the center of the body, the place where breath begins. Let it be soft. Let it rise and fall without effort, without direction, like a boat rocking gently on still water. There is no storm. There is no current. Just the gentle, rhythmic movement of breathing, of being alive, of resting. Feel your chest, your heart beating steadily, quietly, the way it has beaten since before you were born. It does not need your help. It does not need your attention. It simply beats, faithful and constant, the rhythm of life itself, moving through you without effort, without end. Rest in that rhythm. Let it carry you. Feel your hands, your fingers, the tools of so much daily work, writing and holding and lifting and touching and reaching. They are done now. Let them curl softly, naturally, the way a leaf curls when it falls from a branch, open and relaxed and without purpose. Your hands are resting. They have woven enough for today. Feel your shoulders. They have carried so much, not just physical weight, the weight of responsibilities, of worries, of things not yet done and things already past. Let all of that slide away now, like water running off smooth stone. Let your shoulders drop. Let them widen. Let the space between your shoulder blades open and soften. There is nothing to carry. There is nothing to bear. You are unburdened. You are light. Feel your neck, the bridge between body and mind. Let it lengthen and soften. Let the small muscles that hold your head in place release their careful grip. Your head is supported. It does not need to be held. Let it rest completely. Let it be heavy. Let it sink into the pillow the way a stone sinks into soft riverbed sand. Slowly, gently, completely. Feel your face, your jaw. Let it drop open slightly. Let the teeth part. Let the tongue rest softly against the bottom of your mouth, like a sleeping animal, curled and still. Feel your cheeks soften. Feel the tiny muscles around your eyes release, just quiet. Feel your whole body now. All. Just quiet. Feel your whole body now. All of it. From the crown of your head to the soles of your feet. One continuous field of warmth and weight and softness. Every muscle released, every bone supported. Every breath a gentle wave that moves through you and passes on, carrying nothing, asking nothing, simply moving. You are like the river now, flowing without effort, carrying whatever the current brings and letting it go. The stories of tonight, the villages, the characters, the teachings. They float on this current like leaves. You do not need to hold them. They will find their way. They will settle where they are needed, in the quiet soil of your deeper mind, in the place where understanding grows without effort, in the darkness, in the stillness, in sleep. The Buddha taught that every moment is a beginning, that the past is gone and the future has not arrived, and all that exists is this breath, this heartbeat, this instant of awareness before sleep comes. In this moment, you are not the mistakes you have made. You are not the harm you may have caused. You are not the words you wish you had not spoken, or the actions you wish you could undo. In this moment, you are simply here, breathing, resting, being. And tomorrow, when you wake, you will begin again. You will pick up the reeds and sit beneath the tamarind tree and weave. You will shape the clay and tend the soil and cast the net and speak the words and make the choices that form the basket of your life. And you will have this teaching with you, not as a weight, not as a warning, but as a companion, a quiet voice that says, choose the current carefully, weave with attention, open your hands. The two rivers meet and become one. The water flows on, the stars turn overhead, the village sleeps. Mira's basket sits half-finished beneath the tamarind tree, waiting for the morning, waiting for the hands that will complete it with care. And you are part of this river. Your actions flow into the great current of all actions, joining and mingling with the choices of every other being in this vast, interconnected world. You cannot control where the water goes, but you can choose what you pour into it: kindness or cruelty, truth or deception, generosity or greed, patience or haste, attention or neglect. Choose well, not perfectly, not heroically, just well, just carefully, just with the quiet intention of someone who understands that every strand matters. The night is deep now, the air is still. The rivers murmur their endless song. Somewhere, a bird sleeps in a tamarind tree. Somewhere, a basket waits to be finished. Somewhere, a potter shapes clay by lamplight, choosing to do the right thing even when it is hard. Somewhere, a merchant opens his hands. Somewhere, a woman plants reeds along a stream she once poisoned. Somewhere, a man sets down a stone he has carried for 20 years and feels, for the first time, the lightness of truth. These stories live in you now, not as memories to recite, not as lessons to study, but as seeds planted in good soil. They will grow in their own time. They will bloom when the season is right. You do not need to tend them tonight. You do not need to do anything tonight. Simply rest. Simply breathe. Simply be here, in this moment, in this body, in this breath. The basket of your life is being woven, even now, even in sleep. And the strands being woven in this moment are peace and rest and quiet and warmth. Good strands, strong strands, the kind that hold. Let your eyes stay closed. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across a wide, empty sky. The sky does not hold the clouds. It lets them pass. Let your mind be that sky, vast and open and untroubled. The clouds pass. The sky remains. You are the sky. The thoughts are clouds. Let them go. Breathe in, soft, slow. Breathe out, warm, easy. One more breath. And now simply rest. There's nowhere to go, nothing to become, no one to be. The rivers flow, the baskets hold, the trees grow slowly toward the light. And you are here, safe and held and warm, drifting gently toward sleep, carried by the current of your own breathing, toward the deep, still water where dreams begin. Sleep well. And thank you for joining us at Sleepy Monk.